Me and my mother believe that our house is cursed. So basically, my dad died 9.5 years ago from MND. His sister makes comments about how my dad didn't get to enjoy my mum's parents' inheritance, who are both still alive. She also makes comments about how it's unfair that my dad is gone, but my mother's still alive. 2.5 years ago, she came down from Greece to visit. She insisted on staying with us, not her parents. She asked my mum if she could sleep on the couch my dad passed on, and my mum was completely fine with that. She also brought along her sister-in-law, who stayed in my mum and late dad's room. That morning, my mum heard her sister-in-law asking her if my mum saw or heard her either take or put something in the house. My mum asked them what they were talking about, and my auntie told her that they were just discussing something on Facebook. We've looked through all of my dad's stuff, so we don't believe she took something, rather just put something elsewhere. Ever since she left back to Greece, we've had nothing but bad luck. I personally hear and see things from the corner of my eye. I also get an eerie feeling from being in the house. We lose things, then they pop up in places we already checked. My mum also got diagnosed with breast cancer last year in November, which she luckily beat, and now is in remission. Me and my sister, who doesn't live in the house but comes over every day, have both been in multiple abusive situations with partners. Maybe we're overthinking. My family moved to this house around 2017. Everything was honestly chill for the time being, up until mid-2019. We have a wooden cabinet in our front room. For details, it has 2 big glass doors in the centre and 1 glass door on each side, 4 drawers going down the centre, and 2 small wooden doors at the bottom. The single glass door on the right started opening on its own. Not a lot of suspicion rose yet, considering the cabinet is old, and it was probably just a loose door. We noticed that stuff was starting to feel off. Seeing figures, bathroom door unlocking, flickering lights, all that stuff. In the middle of the conversation, my mom remembered that we had a Ouija board in the bottom drawer of the cabinet. Again, not a lot, but we were still freaked out. My older sister, a while later, brought in an older Ouija board from 1971 that she had gotten from Goodwill. I instantly didn't like the vibes, and she for some reason decided to open it. Bad idea. The energy got a lot worse, especially in my room for some reason. Feeling stuff poke and touch me, hearing things, seeing things, it led me to having really bad paranoia. Even my reflection in the mirror in my room just looks off sometimes. I've woken up to see things run across my room, or to weird music box music playing. One of the small wooden doors even opened once, despite being locked soon after that. Other board was brought in. And when my sister and I decided to look at the one in our cabinet, not even a minute later, there was a loud crash in the kitchen. So keep in mind, don't mess around with Ouija boards. Honestly, at this point, I'm used to everything, but considering I have no one else to tell this. Also, my sister gave the older Ouija board to a friend who also experienced freaky shit and ended up cleansing it, but we unfortunately still have the other one. I just wanted to share my experiences of getting visited by my recently departed dad. They both started out the same way, with me suddenly feeling very tired and dropping to sleep, and immediately beginning to dream. The first visit went as follows, copied from a text to my mom immediately after I woke. He was in this house with a bunch of other people I didn't know. It started with a bunch of teenagers or older kids running into the girls' room, and I went in there and told them all to get out. but they were laughing and hiding under the blankets. Then I turned to the hall, and it was a long hall with rooms on each side. At the end, there was blue light, and I could see a tricycle parked in one of the doorways. Then I saw him like in silhouette, but something got in my way. And when I saw it again, it was a fat old man with a mustache who just smiled at me. Then I started looking hard for him again, and he was in this like den area that I walked a couple steps down into. And he was around the corner. And this time, I ran to him and hugged him. I could even smell him mom. He just said, "Tell your mom thank you for picking me up." And then something about talking or not talking to cops. And then he said, "You won't be able to hear me if you're louder than me." When I was crying hard and saying I missed him, I got the feeling it was like a visiting place, you know? Like each room was for someone over there to visit someone here. Then it felt like I was hugging myself and he was gone. And I woke up. The above visits, from falling asleep to waking up again, took place in no more than 20 minutes. The second visit, same thing. Just relaxing in my basement and suddenly felt so tired and dropped off to sleep. This time, I climbed the stairs which end at the kitchen, and he was sitting at my kitchen table by the light switch with his legs stretched out and crossed at the ankles like he always did, smoking a cigarette, lol. Said nothing, just gave me a hug. I really needed one that day. I remember this one weird experience I had when I was 10. I was playing on my Xbox when I got this sudden urge to go to the bathroom. I had this storage room that always gave me weird vibes or energy that was in between my room and the bathroom. So every time I had to go to the bathroom, I needed to go past the storage room. This is when things get weird. When I went out of my room, I saw a head peeking through the doorway of that room. I blinked right before I was able to process what I had just seen. When I opened my eyes, it was gone. I stood there in shock for a few seconds, right before my mum asked if I was okay. Because she saw me just suddenly stop and stand in the middle of the hallway in silence for a few seconds. I told her I was fine. I lied to her about why I just stopped, because I knew she wouldn't believe me if I told her what I just saw. I lost the urge to go to the bathroom, and instead I looked around at every corner of that room and found nothing. I wasn't even scared. I just felt empty and confused. But weeks after that encounter, I began to have anxiety and panic attacks for the next 2 summers. I now have out of nowhere remembrance of that and just think about how the face looked. It looked like a female's head. It had the colour of a greenish brown, like it was decaying. The weirdest part of how it looked, perfectly horizontal. Like if someone got a mannequin head, taped it perfectly on its side right on the edge of the doorframe. This would be my first ever experience with something like this, and I hope it will be my last. My husband was driving, and I was in the passenger seat. We were chilling out with some music and quiet time just rolling along. We were on Sandy Boulevard and turned right into Northeast 148th Avenue. Not far after the turn, there was a railroad crossing. Right past the crossing is when we experienced what we experienced. Suddenly, a strange feeling came over both of us. The frame was only a second or two, but in both of our minds, we were transported back in time. We believe this because of the look of the area. Where there is currently industrial buildings and a paved road, suddenly there was all farmland with tall amber-coloured grass and a narrow gravel road. Along the left side of the road by the ditch, there was an old sedan, possibly early 50s, rounded edges with the trunk open, possibly maroon. As we looked at the vehicle, a man who was crouched behind it stood up. He was stocky, probably in his 40s or 50s, but his face is too obscure to recall. He seemed very ordinary and nondescript, but dangerous. There was an extreme tension to the moment. The man was glaring and very clearly telling us with his expression to turn the other way. There was a feeling that we'd just stumbled upon something very bad, and that we would be next if we didn't turn back. Predator looking at prey. Almost like he had just pulled a body out of the other side and didn't want to be caught. And then it was over. Like a snap of a finger, everything went back to normal. We were back on that same modern paved road, driving along. We both turned to each other and said, "Did you feel that?" We compared stories, and both my husband and I had witnessed the exact same thing. So eerie and inexplainable. The thing is, it was too short of an experience to really gather all the information. It was almost like an imprint in our consciousness, rather than the world physically changing around us. It was similar to watching a movie, but someone spliced in a few frames from decades back of the same location. I've tried to mention the experience to a few trusted people, but the whole thing isn't as sexy as a horror film ghost story, and I don't have enough information to make it that interesting. However, I have racked my brain ever since for what this could be. I grew up in a brick 1940s house in the Midwest US. Let me say first that the Midwest itself has a weird energy to it. But it's even weirder when your parents are antique collectors. Walking the halls of our home, you'd see antique furniture everywhere. Old advertisements of bygone eras, 1920s talc tins with grinning goddesses, and multi-generational Victorian hair wreaths. And around our front yard was a rusty iron fence that my dad had taken from an old cemetery plot. It was definitely odd looking back, but this was the space I grew up in. To me, it was home. Home was definitely a bit odd at times. I would always feel things that other people's couldn't. There was a long hallway that ran the length of the house and up past my bedroom. That whole hallway gave me the creeps. I almost always felt watched, especially late at night, peering out with one eye under my covers in the 1830s wooden bed. It had belonged to a captain whose daughter founded a prominent college in our town. She apparently used to do seances to try to connect with her deceased daughter. I didn't know any of this until years later. The creepiest experience I had in my room was when I was about 9 years old. On this particular night, I woke up unexpectedly. It was about 1 a.m. according to my clock. Nothing felt strange, but I looked up, and there was a girl in the middle of my bedroom. At first, I thought that it was my sister, but as I focused my eyes a bit more, I realized that it wasn't. She was probably 5 or 6 years old and was see-through, in a white Victorian gown, floor length and long sleeve with lace trimmings. She had long hair down to her waist and was facing the window by my bed. Although she was transparent, she had a blue shimmer to her, possibly due to the way the moon was casting. She walked over to the 1940s doll crib that I had next to my bed and started touching my Beanie Babies inside of it. I didn't feel scared and asked her, "Do you like my toys?" That was when she looked at me quickly, startled, as if she hadn't seen me there before. And then she quickly ran out of my room, disappearing right before the door. Just like that, she was gone. For years, my parents joked about the little dead girl in my room. They either didn't want to believe me or thought I must have been dreaming. But I know what I experienced. You always think that when something like that happens, you'll be scared. But the whole event was rather peaceful and calm. My husband and I just had our 9th anniversary yesterday. Everyone who knows us knows that we met in a thrift store in the Midwest, but not a lot of people know about the other stories from that place. The place was creepy from the start. It always just felt off in there, and no one wanted to stay long after the lights went off. My husband and I would hang out behind the building often, which was a big open field with a raised plateau to the east. We'd find Indian bead fossils in the old limestone rocks that cluttered the area and enjoy getting outside on our breaks. You definitely didn't want to be in there when you didn't have to be. To start, every morning there would be strange sounds. This included banging on the side door, hangers shifting on the racks, bags rustling, and the creaking of old shopping carts. Our manager, a devout apostolic Christian woman, would get there before everyone else. Surprising to us due to her religious beliefs, she admitted to experiencing the same things that we had, although for her, it was worse due to getting there before everyone else. They are out there, she said. That's why I always stay in back until the other employees get here. So many times, I've heard someone knocking at that door, and there's never anyone there when I open it. Another weird aspect was the strange clanking sound that would happen every night. It sounded like it was up on the roof or in the rafters. After the lights went out and our employees headed to the back, it would start. At one point, I invited my medium friend over to cleanse the property. The clanking noise went away for a few weeks, and then slowly returned, getting louder and louder. Some other strange experiences were a strange cigar smell that came and went, a sound of a woman humming when no one was around, and a music box that went off fully wound once, right after the lights were turned off. Once, on my day off, I had my strangest encounter. I was walking down an aisle and saw a regular customer at the other end. I was in an Alice in Wonderland dress because that was part of my aesthetic at that age. Fittingly, mid-conversation with this regular, a teacup flew off the shelf and landed a couple feet in front of my Mary Jane shoes. I estimate that it travelled 3 feet to the right and 3 feet back towards me. It was definitely not a situation of just falling off of the shelf. The regular just stared with his eyes wide while I went to get a broom. Nothing strange surprised me at that store. The weirdest encounter of all belongs to my husband. Right after he turned the lights out and was heading to the back, he noticed an elderly man standing behind the center clothing rack. These racks were about 5 foot tall, so we could only see his bald head and his glasses peering over. He got a bit angry at this point, telling the man that they were closed and he needed to leave. As he came around the rack, though, no one was there. The man had vanished, because he was never really there at all. Throughout the year I worked there were too many strange experiences to write them all. There was definitely something going on at that location, some sort of energy either attached to the land or the items themselves. I visit whenever I go back to my hometown, but it's officially closed this year due to strain from the COVID pandemic. I do wonder what will go in its place though, and if the new employees will experience the same things. Several years back, my now husband was living with his dad following his parents' divorce, and I would often spend the night. Usually, his dad would drive to his girlfriend's place and leave us the house to ourselves. I liked being alone, but it was also kind of creepy. Whenever we would go into his dad's room, it would always have a really weird vibe, almost as if he was still in there looking at us angrily and was going to come at us if we didn't leave immediately. Needless to say, we didn't go in there often. On the weekends, it was pretty common for my husband to have his old high school friends over. You know, the usual type of basement rendezvous. Drinking, playing GTA, and making dumb jokes. On one such night, we were all hanging out, and we heard some footsteps upstairs in the dad's room. It sounded like his heavy work boots, but we just kind of put it out of our heads and ignored it, since we knew we had left with his car hours ago. A few minutes later, though, we heard the sound of a throat clearing up there. It was unmistakably the dad's throat clearing. He had a certain unique rhythm he always made, and that was definitely it. My husband and I both looked at each other, and one of his friends did too. Chills up our spine. "Is your dad home?" he said. "No, he's not." We all just kind of looked around, not sure what to say or think. My husband and I sneaked up there to make sure he hadn't come home, and nope, no one was there. The whole thing is really creepy, and it almost felt like his energy was so strong in that room that it eventually manifested as something. I'm curious if anyone else has had something similar happen. Please, let me know. I grew up in central Illinois and moved out on my own at age 19 to attend college. I had a strange experience one night in my apartment that I'm looking for some input on. The area where my college apartment was a bit weird, along some farmland at the very edge of the city. It's like someone just took an apartment complex and plopped it down in the middle of a cornfield. Looking out across the land, you could see nothing but field and grey skies, with some wind turbines far out in the distance. The whole place had this gloomy and lonely, almost forgotten vibe. And that feeling was in my apartment too, mixed with a sense of always being watched. I always felt a sense of dread when squeezing up the narrow stairway to my upstairs apartment. One day, while looking out at the sky, I saw something hovering in the distance. It was too far to make out. It just looked like a large black circle, and it didn't move at all. There was no sound like you would expect from a helicopter. I'm not sure what it was, but I checked on it several times and it never moved at all. It was just kind of hanging there in the sky. After about an hour of occasional checks, I noticed that it was gone. I'm not sure if it's at all related to what comes next, but I thought it was worth mentioning since this happened not long after. The story at hand happened one night when my long-distance boyfriend, now husband, was visiting. He knew how much I hated being so far from everyone and living in this gloomy place, so we'd spend the night a couple nights a week between my classes, internship, and waitressing job. We were up late as usual in bed, just having a conversation. That was when it happened. Out of nowhere at 3 a.m., there was an instant and palpable sense of dread. Not like the usual sense of gloom we always had there, bone-chilling dread. If you've never experienced this, it might seem like a feeling is hardly worth writing a story on. But I think that humans instinctively know when a predator is there, even if your eyes can't see it. We were mid-conversation, and suddenly everything in the air shifted. It was as if the most evil thing possible was at the foot of our bed, coming closer. Whatever it was invisible to the naked eye, but we both instinctively knew it was there. It had us both paralyzed with fear. Both of us, lying still in the bed, started silently praying, calling on God that whatever this invisible force was, to leave us alone. The hairs on the back of our necks stood up. We could sense it was there, staring back at us. And suddenly, in a blink of an eye, the street lamp outside my window blew out, and the feeling was gone. It's like whatever it was flew over us and out of the apartment. There was an instant release and a huge wave of relief. Then, all of the other street lights at the complex went out all at once. It was gone as soon as it came. If you were observing us at that moment, you'd just see two people sitting up in bed relaxing. There was nothing that either of us did to tip the other off as to what we were experiencing. But we both turned to each other after the street lamps went out and recalled the same paralyzing fear and sense of doom we had never experienced before. Whatever this was, it was certainly there to cause us harm. and I believe that it was able to manipulate electrical systems due to my lights burning out. I've never experienced that type of terror since, or ever had a similar experience. I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts or has experienced the same thing. This is a true story that happened about 8 years ago. There's a strip of highway near my hometown where too many accidents have happened. It isn't curvy, it isn't bumpy. It's a straight strip of highway that for some reason or another has seen multiple crashes. I first became aware of these accidents when I started dating my then boyfriend. The strip of highway was between both of our places, and I never drove it until we met. One night, I was headed to his place when I saw it. I'm calling it an apparition, although I have no idea what it was. It was a white, transparent essence that appeared to dive in front of my car. I know it could have been a mist, but it was fast and looked like a ghost. It startled me, and I swerved the car, nearly crashing into the guardrail. I corrected last minute and straightened out, feeling grateful to be okay and making note of where it happened so I could tell my boyfriend about it. The next time, I was driving with him. I showed him the spot. He looked shocked and told me that 2 kids from school had gone over that guardrail. One didn't survive. Now at the time, I had no idea about this. I had heard him mention the accident before, but I didn't go to his school, so I didn't know any of the details of where it had happened. To add to that creepiness, he also told me that his aunt had crashed her motorcycle on this spot on the highway. It was an aneurysm, so can't necessarily be chalked up to something paranormal, but it added to the eeriness. After that day, I've always made a note of that guardrail when I passed it. Within a 3-month period, I noticed the guardrail had been crashed into at least 3 more times. I saw a new crumpled spot. Then the rail was replaced. Then 2 more crumpled spots occurred the next week. Overall, I don't know what was going on there. Is it unusual for a guardrail to be hit often on a straight stretch of road? Or am I just noticing it because I almost hit that guardrail? Also, can mist travel quickly, as if diving in front of the car? Or was it something else? There might be a scientific explanation out there, but the whole thing creeps me out. This one night, I had 4 different dreams about the same person. A boy who was probably a couple years older, but somehow felt very familiar. In these dreams, we became closer, and then he died. After that, I remember walking by this framed spiritual object with different animals on it, and each time I touched one, I got this instinctive feeling that he was being reincarnated as that animal. Now, at this time, I should have had no knowledge of reincarnation. My family wasn't religious, and I don't remember the theory ever being mentioned until I was much older. Yet somehow in his dream, I knew that was happening. Between these dreams, I would wake up and go back to sleep, only to have the story pick up where it left off each time. It was very unlike any dream pattern I've ever had in this way. Usually if I wake up, the dream and the plot is over. But this time, that wasn't the case. The strangest part, however, is what happened in real life the next day. The next morning, as I walked into school, he was holding the door for me. At that age, it didn't occur to me how weird any of this was. I just thought, oh, that's nice. It's the guy from my dream. It wouldn't be until much later that I started to wonder about this whole thing. And by that time, I couldn't remember what he looked like or a name or anything. I'm curious what your opinions are on this. Has anyone experienced something similar? Also, what could this be? Is it a weird coincidence? Or does it have greater meaning? Is it possibly some sort of guardian angel type thing? Or past life thing? Or just a face I'd seen but never assigned meaning to until it was in my dreams? Who knows? My husband recently had something similar happen, only it was just one dream. In it, he was friends with this girl, and when he ordered his breakfast at the drive-thru the next day, the girl from his dreams was working the window. He thought it was really strange. He also noted that she didn't just give him his card back and keep it moving. She took a moment to have conversation with him and was exceedingly friendly and personable. It really makes you wonder sometimes. For several years, I worked for a woman who sold vintage and second-hand purses. I was in charge of cleaning, listing, and photographing the bags. One day, I sold the most beautiful Brahmin. It was their Melbourne leather in a beautiful magenta pink and looked hardly used. Since I thought it was such a beautiful bag, I spent longer than usual hyper-focusing on cleaning every little crevice. I wanted it to be perfect since it was in such great condition. I turned all of the linings inside out and made sure it was spotless. Then I sent it out. About a week later, I received a message from the buyer. She wanted to know if I had put a Virgin Mary pendant inside it. I told her that no, I hadn't, and that I was confused what she was talking about. I apologized that it was in there and hoped it wasn't an issue. She messaged me back in disbelief, saying that her mother had recently died and had always worn a pendant just like that. She had been struggling to manage her grief, and that rather than being upset, she was so grateful that the pendant had seemingly by magic found its way inside the bag. Though it was just a small little pendant, I could tell that it meant a lot to her, truly a miracle. I don't have all the answers for these strange things that happen, but I hope that we can recognize them in our lives and find comfort through them. This is one of my favorite stories from work over the years. A few years ago, my husband and I were looking to buy our first home. With home prices being through the roof on the West Coast, we saw our fair share of less than ideal homes for far too much. But one in particular stood out to me. The instant we pulled up with the realtor, we noticed that the home had an electric gate to keep people out. This wasn't a fancy neighborhood, just a typical suburban area, so it was strange to see high-tech security. We came in through the garage and we immediately noticed two large freezers against the wall. These were the long lid-top ones, around 6 feet each. I thought it was odd, but didn't think too much of it at first. We next made our way into the kitchen. It was nothing out of the ordinary, but the layout was a bit odd, and it looked old yet barely used. Next, we came to a room that was the most vibrant red I'd ever seen in a house. Past that were 2 bedrooms. My husband kind of looked around and noticed, because he notices everything, that the dimensions of the wall didn't line up with the bedroom. He started tapping against the wall and noticed a hollow space behind the wall, probably around 3 by 3 feet. It was where a closet would be, but it was now walled off. If all of that wasn't bizarre, the vibe was the strangest part to me. The second I set foot in the house, I got immediately seduced and drawn in. I don't really know how to describe it since I've never had that experience before or since. But it was like there was some sort of male playboy energy drawing me in and making me feel like my whole body was buzzing. I told my husband about the strange sensation and he was instantly weirded out. He had felt a very strong vibe from the house as well, but his vibe was a domineering male energy telling him to leave immediately before it's too late. I'm curious what others will make of this. This is an old family story that has been passed down from my in-laws and remains a bit of a mystery. My grandma-in-law and father-in-law spoke of it often, but my no-nonsense grandpa-in-law denied it as he got older. The story starts when my grandparents-in-law buy their dream home in the 1980s. After years of hard work, they buy a large piece on the outskirts of my hometown. It was beautiful, the perfect home for entertaining, and they always had guests over. For the grandma, it was the crown jewel of her life. Anyways, the family was very into the Old West and cowboys and Indians type stuff. So they would bring home Native American artifacts they would find and display them. This obviously has some ethical questions around it, but at the time, most people in my hometown didn't think that way. The appearance of the cowboy supposedly started after one such artifact was placed on the mantle. It's hard to say if they were actually linked, but the family seemed to think so. After the artifact was brought in, the shadow man started coming around. Randomly, when the family would eat dinner, they would see him at the end of the hallway. He was hard to make out with not many clear features, but had what looked like a cowboy hat on his head. He would just stand there and watch, stepping back out of view when you would turn to look at him. This went on for several months before one day my grandpa-in-law decided that enough was enough. He threw down his dinner fork, jumped out of his chair and ran at the figure. The shadow man then turned and ran into the bedroom where my grandpa confronted him. Supposedly, the figure stopped in its tracks, turned around, faced my grandpa, and disappeared. He never returned again after this, with my grandpa successfully scaring him off. To this day, I don't know what this could have been, but it's in our family folklore, and I have no reason to disbelieve my grandmother-in-law over what she experienced. I wasn't born at this time, but it remains a favourite family ghost story. Have you ever gotten a strange phone call right when you mentioned a loved one who's passed? If you have, you know how strange it can be. This incident in particular happened late one night in my grandma-in-law's kitchen. Grandma had a sister-in-law who was visiting from the East Coast. She had gotten in late that night, and I went over to visit the two of them with my husband. We were all sitting around the kitchen table, the same one my grandpa-in-law's mother had owned when she built the house. There were a lot of jokes going around the table, and Grandma started coughing from laughing too hard. Now, she was in poor health as it was, and she was supposed to be taking breathing treatments. However, with her having so much fun, a rare occasion since Grandpa had passed, she didn't want to leave the table. My husband was concerned and told her she had to take her treatments. After some convincing, she got up and started heading in that direction. But then she got sucked back into the conversation and distraction from her treatment again. She again started coughing heavily. This was the moment when my husband told her again she needed to take her treatment. If Grandpa saw you right now, he'd be nagging you to take your treatment, my husband told me. That's right, Grandma's sister-in-law said. Don't make me have him call you. Grandma gave a little, yeah, right, kind of chuckle. Right at that moment, the sister-in-law's track phone that she only uses when travelling started to ring. We all stood there, spooked for a moment, and the sister-in-law went to answer it. It immediately disconnected when she opened it after several rings. The weirdest part was that this was at around 11:30 East Coast time on a phone that no one would have the number for outside of immediate family. Grandma immediately took her breathing treatment after that, not wanting to argue with what could have been a message from beyond the grave. Her husband had always reminded her about her treatments while alive, so it wouldn't be unusual for him to do the same after. I'm not sure exactly what happened there, but I like to think it was Grandpa. I know that my grandma felt that way too, especially after other instances of footsteps in the house and sounds of him getting up in the night for water long after he passed. Did anyone else grow up in a haunted house? I grew up in an old home that was decorated almost entirely with antiques, and I had many experiences throughout the years. My room itself had a mid 1800s wooden bed with matching dresser, and throughout the home were Victorian hair wreaths, daguerreotypes, and other old oddities. The side of the yard that my room overlooked was actually enclosed by an old iron fence from a cemetery. It was creepy, to say the least. Every night when I went to bed, I would tense up and feel paralyzed, like something was watching me right outside my door. It wasn't just me. Anytime friends stayed over, they felt something there. It got to the point where friends would never stay over. It really was that bad. The first odd thing to happen besides that feeling was with my Barbie washing machine. On probably 5 separate occasions, it randomly turned on in the middle of the night. I would be completely asleep and wake up to the whirling sound of the toy, which he had to push the button in on to get it to go. A few years after that, I woke one night to see a girl in my room. She was probably around 5 with long hair and a long white Victorian nightgown. It was floor length with long sleeves. She was transparent with a blue sheen to her from the way the light cast in the window. She stood at a little toy crib next to my bed and started touching my stuffed animals. "Do you like my toys?" I asked. At that moment, she looked startled, as if she hadn't noticed me there before. She turned and ran for the door, vanishing before she got there. The whole experience was actually really peaceful and not scary how most people picture a ghost encounter going. The next weird thing was a radio that went on in my room. It was a little battery-operated radio I had gotten for selling magazines at school, and I had never used it. One day, after I left my room and walked down the hall, the radio started blaring opera music. Again, I had never used it, so it was odd it would just turn on. Then, there were 2 times my phone disappeared. It might sound odd, but both times it went missing, I knew before I returned to where I left it. Randomly, the thought that it was missing would pop up in my head, and when I went back, it would be gone. Both times, it showed up randomly in the center of the room an hour or so later. The final story I'll mention, although there are more happenings, is the time a friend came over to communicate with the spirits. She was a self-described medium, and I didn't really believe her, but I was curious as to what she would say. She went down to my basement full of antiques and said she could sense a man down there. I didn't really know what to believe, but when she mentioned he was walking upstairs, the stairs started to creak. A minute later, she said he was coming back down, and they started creaking again. The weird part is those stairs never creak unless someone is on them. She continued through the house and picked up on another spirit, this time of a woman who was supposedly attached to a black Victorian perfume bottle, according to my friend. After that, I took my friend home, ready to be done with the ghost stuff. When I pulled up in the driveway, I looked up and saw a woman in the kitchen window. I figured it was my mom doing her nightly dishwash, but after I exited my car, I realized her car was gone. No one was home but me. I called my parents and refused to go in the house until they got home. They made fun of me for it, like with my other experiences, but for me, it wasn't fun at all. It was truly bizarre. Anyways, those are some of my experiences at that house. The last few times I was there, I didn't notice anything that felt off. And that being watched feeling has mostly gone away. Sometimes I wonder if I've just lost my ability to sense things over the years, or if the energy really is different. It happened one night on an old country road. My now husband and his best friend were hanging out well after dark with the rest of the guys in the friend group. It was an old dirt road with nothing around. One of those roads you know well if you grew up in the country. They dubbed it Burnout Road. They were all cracking jokes and tossing back energy drinks when suddenly they heard something from the ditch across the road. Out of nowhere, behind some trees, a voice said, "Daddy?" It sounded like that of a boy between the ages of 4 and 7, with the pitch going up at the end as if the boy was scared and calling out for his father. Only my husband and his best friend heard it. The rest of the group were oblivious. My husband saw the perplexed look on his friend's face and said, "What did it say?" He wanted to affirm he heard the same thing before his logical friend could deny it. "Daddy," his friend said. Years later, my husband told me the story. I decided it would be fun to go back there and see if anything else would happen. We went down to the old Burnout Road, this time in the daytime because I was too scared to try at night. And the daylight caused us to notice something that the group had never noticed when they were there in the dark. Behind the trees where the voice had come from, there was a burned out house. It was so damaged that it was mostly a basement at that point. The overgrowth of trees had hidden it in the dark, and the daylight gave us a different view. There were still some objects strewn around, including some toys. Based on how the objects looked, it seems like the house burned down in the 1980s or 90s. I scoured newspaper records online to see if I could find anything about the fire, but there was nothing. I have to wonder though if that voice was some sort of imprint left behind by a child who lived through it. Later on, there would be other phenomena that only my husband and his best friend would notice. It seems like the two of them had some sort of perception that the rest of their friends lacked. I know a lot of people like to think of ghosts as imagination or hallucinations, but how do you explain two people experiencing the same phenomena multiple times? There has to be something out there. It all started in the 1980s, when my husband's family moved into an old farmhouse. It was one of those dark, dilapidated ones you always see in movies about the paranormal, but they're quite common in the rural Midwest town he grew up in. According to his father, the place had served as a stagecoach stop at some point, but later was just a family home. It was 2 stories with a smaller little house on the property as well. My husband's sister's rooms were upstairs against the attic portion, and when my husband was born in the 90s, his room was at the bottom of the stairs. Often as a child, he would fall on those stairs. It would just be poor balance due to being young, but he always felt like something was pushing him, and he was scared of those stairs that bordered his room. On the same level of the house was his parents' bedroom. They would often hear inexplicable sounds in the night while they were trying to sleep. One sound was that of marbles. It sounded like they were rolling across the floor above them, but seemingly without the barrier of walls. They just roll on and on for what seemed like forever. The other sound was the log sound. Often, it would sound like large logs were hitting the roof and rolling down, but whenever they checked, there was nothing to account for it. Up in the middle sister's room, toys moved without explanation. Several times, she would complain about mice moving her toys. Once his mom went upstairs to see a Barbie car moving around as if guided by an invisible hand. Time to time, there'd be whispers heard in the attic as well. My husband's mom was religious and prayed for the spirits to leave. Things seemed to calm down for a while, but the family soon decided to leave. Not just because of these happenings, but due to hostile neighbours as well. After moving out, another family soon moved in to rent the property. A while later, his mom ran into them and struck up a conversation about how they were adjusting to the home. Apparently, they had been hearing constant whispering in the attic and had confined themselves only to the bottom level. Whatever my husband's family had experienced had gotten much worse since their new family moved in, to the point that they refused to use half of the house. Over time, they spoke less and less of the house, but we do have several hundred photos that were taken when they lived there. Weirdly, all of the photos are very dark, and double exposures are very common, but weirdly only happen in photos that the middle sister is in. I'm not sure exactly what went on in that house. There was definitely a lot of creepy stuff going on. It was a few years back when we were driving on an industrial road in the town we live in. We passed some train tracks and suddenly experienced the slip. It's hard to explain if you've never experienced it, but it's almost like something imprinted a memory on our brain. Instead of the industrial paved road, it was an older rural gravel road with tall golden grass and no buildings. It looked like the 40s or 50s. A man was pulled off of the side of the road, looking angrily at us as if we had done something terrible, and was angered we had come upon him. The mood was very go now or else. Then just like that, reality snapped back into place. During this slip, there was no sound. It was only visual and lasting a fraction of a second. The best way to describe it is if all of our consciousness is a movie reel and someone spliced a short flashback in the middle of the reel. After the experience, my husband and I were both very quiet. And then he said to me, "Did you feel that?" I had him tell me what he experienced so that there was no way he could be changing his story to fit mine. It was one of the strangest things I've ever experienced. My boyfriend, 23 male, and I, 21 female, just moved into our new apartment together a little over a month ago. Ever since we moved in, I've always felt like there's something weird in our apartment. At first, we chalked it up to both of us just being nervous in our new place, or just us not putting things away carefully, or just being clumsy, but things keep happening. I've always been more sensitive to these things. Spirits and emotions are so easily picked up on, and my family has always been aware of it. My grandma used to work at the church, so when she moved here, she came and blessed the house with me to help me feel safer, since I already didn't like how the apartment felt dirty spiritually. Anyway, the first week here, we had a stove spoon, the ceramic thing to hold your cooking utensil so it doesn't get your stove of counters dirty. It was that and a pot that were the only things on a drying rack inside of the sink, so they were snugly wedged in. When we woke up at 6 to get ready for work, we heard a loud crash, like something was thrown and went to the kitchen to see it, and the pot both on the ground. The ceramic spoon was completely shattered, and we chalked it up to us not putting it away properly, when I knew there was no way for it to just fall out, especially when it had some distance from the sink. Then I started waking up with bruises and having nightmares. I work at a vet clinic, so I chalked the bruises up to aggressive animals. But when I took a week off of work for personal reasons, I was still getting new ones. I chalked it up to me just being clumsy, but I still had no clue what's going on and still don't. This morning, again at 6 a.m, I started to have a really strange dream. There was a little girl who was just kicking and kicking and kicking at my legs. I surprisingly got super annoyed and stomped trying to kick her back. But as soon as I did, I woke up and my leg was up and already stomping down on my boyfriend's leg as we were both lying down. He woke up from it and cursed. And as he did, we both heard the same giggle and footsteps in our bedroom, like there was someone running out of the room. I'm absolutely terrified, and I've not felt this way in a long time. My shins are red, and they hurt where the little girl was kicking. My heart's still pounding, and I feel like crying. There's just a constant feeling of anxiety in my chest, and I don't know what to do or if I'm going crazy. All our neighbours are older men who don't have kids, and this neighbourhood is generally child-free. I've also had my nephews over previously, and those footsteps were almost identical to small feet running throughout. Am I going crazy? What do I do? I don't mess with spiritual things because I know I'm sensitive to them and just don't want to deal with them. But I've never been physically hurt by them in this way. I'm going to be going to work soon, and honestly, I don't want to come back after. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. I'm not convinced that there is an afterlife where some conscious being survives a bodily death. I'm interested in some possible explanations on what occurred a few weeks ago. I'd really like some skeptics to weigh in with some of their opinions. I suffer from diabetes and as a result have to wake in the evening 2 or 3 times to urinate. It sucks, but I've been living with this for a few years now. My wife and I also have a dog and a cat as well, as 2 wonderful children. Sometimes the dog will also need to go out in the middle of the night. Since I'm used to getting up anyway, I usually get up and let her out. One evening, as the dog barked to indicate she needed to go out, I woke and took her downstairs toward the door to the backyard. However, for a split second, I saw with alarming clarity an old man sitting in a leather chair that we have in our living room. I was just casually glancing over as we went down the stairs from the bedroom area toward the living room and down towards the family room to the back door. It was really an instant. A split second he was there looking at me, and I looked away. And my mind grew ever alert and fully woke me to deal with this intruder. When I glanced back, he was gone. I continued down the stairs to let the dog out. I went back upstairs while she did her business in the backyard. I looked at the chair. Nothing. However, I was getting a very uneasy feeling looking at what wasn't there. It still felt like someone was in it, watching me. As it happens, the dog's food and water bowls are by the chair. I noticed she was out of water, so grabbed the bowl and went to the kitchen to fill it. As I was going back into the living room, I still felt uneasy approaching that chair. I placed the water down beside the chair and turned to retrieve the dog from the backyard. The routine is she gets in from the yard and gets a drink on her way back up to the bedroom to go to sleep again. I let her in. She proceeds up the stairs with me, waits for my verbal command of okay to let her know she can approach her water and food bowls. She starts and gets to within 12 feet of the bowl and aforementioned chair and stops, staring at the chair. I go to nudge her with my foot and give her another okay to let her know it's fine to get a drink. Her tail goes between her legs and she lets out a low growl and becomes very stiff. I encourage her again with an okay, but nothing. So I tell her, let's go to bed. And she immediately starts up the stairs to the bedroom. When we get upstairs, she's her normal self, except she paws at her empty water bowl in our bedroom. So I go to the master bathroom and fill the bowl quickly for her, and she starts lapping up water. Clearly thirsty, but not willing to approach her bowl by the leather chair. In bed, I start to think about what I had seen. An old man, clearly well-aged and not in good health. If you're a Star Wars fan, think Palpatine-esque around the eyes and pallor of skin. Wispy white hair, clearly thinning over the eyes, limp and greasy. Old yellow teeth with receding gums and wet lips. Pale blue bloodshot eyes with droopy eyelids. Pale skin with pale liver spots. An orange tartan bathrobe with matching slippers. Pale blue pajama pants and button shirts with white buttons and white piping on the seams of the shirt and pants. a large metal pole with a bag of IV solution, and a tube with tapped up needle into the back of his left wrinkly hand. This was clearly someone in palliative care and with limited or no mobility. There is an old folks home in my neighbourhood, but it would be a 15-minute walk from me. An otherwise mobile and healthy individual, but for the diabetes. Not a walk made by a dying man with an IV pole. We have a security system that was armed at the time. When I checked in the morning, none of the doors were open, but for the back door at 3:30 a.m. when I let the dog out. There is video footage of me letting out the dog. We don't have any video in the living room. I can almost dismiss this vision as me being tired and in a half-dream state letting the dog out. What I'm having trouble explaining is my dog's reaction. Granted, she is a bit of a chicken at times. The only time she was truly like this is when she was a pup, growling at some of the Halloween decorations we had outside. I wanted to relieve her of the fear, so I brought her in the house so she could see and not be afraid, but it led her to peeing on the spot in fear. The only other incident we have ever experienced in this house was when my daughter was 15, last year. She was cleaning her closet when she distinctly heard an old man's voice in the closet saying he was going to kill her unless she left. She came to me in tears. I investigated as best I could and thought perhaps she heard something on the TV or her brother's video games. A sound can travel in weird ways. She insisted that the voice was in the closet, and she didn't see anybody, but felt like someone was in there with her. Although I did see an old man, I didn't get a sense of doom or dire feelings, although I did feel uneasy, like one might when walking in a bad neighbourhood at night. Very interested to hear some possible explanations. I grew up in a ranch in Mexico. My family had fields on fields on fields of corn, wheat, and some avocado. I used to play in the cornfield because that was behind my nana's house. It was like a maze. I loved to run around there with my cousins. Well, one evening, I trailed off too deep and I got lost. I was 7 years old when this happened. As it got darker, I began to cry and roaming aimlessly until I was grabbed by my arm. I screamed, but quickly realized that it was my nana's neighbor. In Spanish, she was my nana's comadre. Direct translation of that word is godmother. She baptized 3 of the 13 kids my nana had. In my family, a comadre/compadre is a nickname used as an endearment for the godparents of the kids they baptized. Well, my nana's comadre, Petra, found me and said, "Maya, why are you out so late? You know stuff creeps at night." I told her I was lost. She reprimanded me gently, but then she told me I was far away from my nana's house, and because it was cold, it would be best to go to her house. I held her hand as she led me to her house. She asked if I was hungry, and I told her I was. She told me she had just made flour tortillas and had beans cooking and should be finished soon. I was happy because that's one of my favorite dishes. We got to her house and it was nice and warm. She sat me on her table and she served me a huge bowl of beans and then cut some queso fresco for me. She made me some mini burritos and I happily ate. She then told me she was going to call my nana, that I was at her house. Again, nothing was out of the ordinary. I felt fine. I ate until I was extremely full. Then, after my nana's comadre came back from calling my nana, she sat across from me and smiled at me. She was a small woman with the prettiest hazel eyes, and she said, "I couldn't get a hold of my comadre or compadre. They must be looking for you, so finish up and wash up." I nodded okay. "Also, I need you to tell my comadre that I am so sorry to have left without telling her goodbye," she added. "You're leaving, Nana Petra?" I asked her, feeling really sad. "Yeah, but don't worry, I will come back when the time is right," she smiled at me. I was really sad. "When are you leaving?" I asked her. "When I drop you off, I'll leave with my daughter," she told me. I was sad, but I agreed to tell my nana. Now that I'd finished eating, I washed my hands at her water pillar, and she led me back to the cornfield. She led me to the middle and she kissed my hair and said, "Keep walking there in a straight line. You'll hear your Tata calling out for you. And remember to tell your Nana what I said." I told her yes, and began to walk in a straight line like she had pointed out, and I could hear my Tata in the distance. I called back and we found one another in no time. He was upset. He thought a coyote found me and hurt me, and he reprimanded me until we got to the house where my Nana was sitting at the dining room table. I ran up to her and she asked me where I'd been. I told her that Nana's Petra's house, and she went pale. She asked me to clarify that, and then I told her that she found me, fed me, and brought me to the field when she hadn't been able to reach them on the phone. I told her that she wanted to say goodbye, but she had to leave with her daughter. My Nana began to cry, and I was scared because she was very distraught. My Tata told me to stop lying, and because my Nana was crying, I began to cry with her. I swore it was true. I told them what I saw, what I ate in detail. My Tata told me that it was impossible because my Nana Petra had just died that morning. Also, they mentioned that my Nana didn't have a daughter, only sons. My Tata then called my uncle over and they drove to my Nana Petra's house, and I was never told anything after what they had found. Until I got older, my uncle told me that when they went to her house, they found the door open. The stove was hot, but the water pillar was empty. Also, the daughter mentioned, come to find out, when my Nana Petra was young, like in her early 20s, she miscarried a baby, a girl. My Nana mourned for a very long time for her friend. My uncle was spooked, but they always say that my Nana Petra came to say goodbye to my Nana. But because I got lost, I sidetracked her, but nonetheless, it was spooky that she fed me, and I physically felt my Nana Petra. So I still have a hard time grasping the fact that it had been her spirit and not her physical self. This is another story that happened when I was 5 years old. In Mexico, in the late 90s, my grandparents' ranch didn't have running water, or plumbing system if you will. We had a concrete blockhouse with dirt floors, an outhouse, and we bathed in a nearby river. We did have metal tubs too. If we didn't want to go to the river, we could go to the well and fill them up to bathe. But anyway, it took my grandpa and some of his sons 10 days to expand the house, where I would finally have my own room. The first week I slept fine by myself, until I started seeing the mariachi man. He would wake me up between 2 or 3:30 a.m. I was never scared of him, however. I hated that he would wake me up from my deep sleep. After maybe another week of the man bothering me, I began to talk to him. I realized rather quickly his lips never moved, but I could still hear him speak. He would usually tell me that I needed to listen to him and dig up a certain area of the house, or he would ask me questions about my family. Nothing invasive because I was only 5, and I would go off on tangents if he talked for too long. Anyway, one night he woke me up. He told me that I needed to hurry up and dig up his belongings because he needed to go. I asked him where, and he told me something was hunting him, so I needed to hurry and listen to him now. This time, his tone scared me, so I ran to the kitchen and grabbed a spoon, and he led me to a dark hallway of the house and pointed where I needed to start digging. I listened and I began to dig. As I did, he began to sing a song I knew very well, because my Nana sang a lot to me and my singing was that woke up my grandfather. I remember he stood there in the lit area of the hallway and he looked horrified. I remember the man said that I should probably tell my granddad that he was my friend, so I stood up and said, "Papi, this is my friend. You see him, right?" My grandpa didn't respond, just nodded his head. I then went back down and began digging again. "He's the one that wakes me every night. He tells me I have to dig," I explained to my grandpa, who then left without a word and suddenly reappeared with a shovel. I knew my friend was in the darkness. My grandpa came back and looked spooked. Why do you have to dig? He asked me. I don't know, he just keeps telling me I have to, I responded. And he told me to stand up, and he used his shovel to dig where I had started. After my grandpa dug a significant amount and the hole was pretty deep, the mariachi man told me to tell my grandpa to be careful. A metal box was going to come into view. I then passed along the message, and my grandpa put the shovel down and used his hands to keep digging, until he uncovered a pretty large metal box. I helped him, or at least I thought he did, pulling the box out, and when he opened it, there was money, like super old Mexican money, some gold coins, jewellery, and paperwork as well. I remember being excited when I saw a bracelet, one I still have to this day, and my grandpa took it outside and washed it with some well water we had put it out on me. I was so young then, but my mom told me my grandpa kept all the stuff in a lockbox in a bank in Mexico. He told me to keep it a secret, and because I was so young at some point, I even forgot that this had happened. But my grandpa ended up telling the story till many, many years later. I never saw my mariachi friend again after we had dug up the box. I sometimes wonder if he really had anything to say, or if he was afraid no one would ever find his belongings. I was 5, but I would still remember that nice man from time to time, even though he liked to wake me up at odd hours. When my family first emigrated to America, at one point, 8 people lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. And because my grandpa worked at the fields of Sacramento, California, and was paid only at the end of the month, money was scarce, and they had no furniture. My mom told me that a nice old lady that was the neighbour befriended my grandma, and she gifted my grandma and family heaps of unused or lightly used furniture and mattresses. My grandma was so grateful to this lady that she offered her to clean her house as a thank you for her nice gesture. The lady said no at first, but once she was getting ready to go on an assisted living place, she asked my grandma to clean out her house, and with the help of my mom and 2 daughter-in-laws, they did just that. My mom told me that she saw many photos of a young man, and then they stumbled on an urn. But my grandma reprimanded my mom and said it's rude to be nosy in casa ajena, in another person's home. When she said she was curious to know who was the young man and who was in the urn. Now, after a month or so, my grandma was getting ready to go to the fields with my grandpa. So one of my older uncles came to America to help keep the house in order while she was gone. And since the mattresses were being used, he took the couch to sleep on. The couch had been the lady's. It was fairly new, my mom said, but after a few days of my uncle sleeping on it, they knew something was off. My uncle would wake up everyone in the house when he slept on it. He screamed, he cried. In some instances, if he didn't wake up right away, he would thrash so hard onto the floor, almost as if he was seizing. My mom said it got so bad that they begged my grandma to come back home because something was wrong with my uncle. But because she was so far away and they called in the middle of the month, she still needed to finish her work month to be paid and then go back home. Anyway, my mom always asked my uncle why he screamed in his sleep. At first, my uncle refused to talk about it. But after some time, he told my mom that he was having vivid nightmares of being murdered. He never elaborated on that until one night he screamed so loud and for such a long time that he ruptured his vocal cord and lost his ability to speak for months. By now, my grandma came back home. She was trying to piece everything together, and finally, after my uncle got 80% ability to speak, he told her everything. Since he began to sleep on the couch, he had a dream. The same dream of a man hovering over him with a gun to his head. He spoke in a language he didn't understand. But my uncle said, although I was seeing and hearing this, it wasn't me. I was seeing this through someone else's eyes. He told my grandma that as he could see, he could feel everything as well. He felt the cold barrel. He felt the gunshot to his head. And felt the soul leave the body, and stated it was a painful ascent. My mom told me that my uncle was a strong man, but that was the first time she saw him cry. My grandma was a very spiritual woman. She took my uncle to a healer where she received guidance on what to do. My mom said that my grandma threw away the couch and got the apartment blessed by a priest. All was okay after that. My uncle went back to Mexico, and years later, when they reunited and they spoke about scary stuff, my uncle opened up more about his experience. Even went as far to describe the man he saw in his dream. And my mom was shocked to the core that the man he described as the murderer was the very man she had seen pictures of in the Woman's those many years ago. My mom said she wished she had asked about the man, because now I guess she'll never know much, and it will be a mystery why the guy from the photos she saw murdered the guy on the couch. And whose ashes the woman had in her house too. So my cousins, Quillite, male 14, Guero, male 16, Bonnie, male 15, Chui, male 14, and myself, female 14, when we found the board inside a box in my late great-uncle's house, it was also my cousin Guero's idea to play it. It did take some coaxing, but he convinced all of us to go on an empty field close to my nana's house and try and play with it. We had always been warned to never play with anything like this, but we were kids, and well, you know, we liked to seek the thrill of not listening to adults. Anyway, we did the ritual, or at least what we thought we had to do. We didn't have internet to look this up, but we had heard out of word of mouth from friends that we thought we needed to do, which was place a finger on the tab and move it around as we ask the board a question, and then stop moving when we finished asking the question. Seemed innocent enough. We asked a silly question, like what the day it was, and we got nothing. The tab didn't move at all. Then Bonnie asked, "When will I die?" And the tab began to move. We all laughed, thinking either Bonnie or Chui was moving it. But as it moved across the board, we all felt like an electric shock on our fingertips. It startled me, and I moved my hand off because I felt scared. But quickly, Guero told me to put my hand back, and he called out each letter, and the board spelled out pronto. I remember the feeling around us went from nothing to frightening. I had the urge to back off and run away, but Guero, who could see I was very uncomfortable, reassured me that we were okay, that it was just letting the nervousness getting to us. Now, because Bonnie had checked something that made the tab move, we told him to ask another question. He looked scared, but he finally asked if he was going to be killed. And right away, the tab moved to the word yes. Not gonna lie, when this happened, he took his hand off the board. I remember all of us just looked at him, and Guero tried to calm him. At this point, Guero said that it could be anyone moving the tab, but deep down, that was the excuse to keep the little piece we were holding on to. Because even as Chui, Quillite, and I still had our fingers on the tab, we felt something when the tab moved. Bonnie said he was scared and didn't want to continue, but Guero told him that we had to finish what we started. Bonnie insisted that we stop, and Guero, like the real smooth talker he is, convinced Bonnie to keep playing. This time, had Quillite asked when would Bonnie be killed, Bonnie was pissed he asked that. Quillite was the jokester among us. I think he was trying to lighten the mood, but Bonnie was on the edge of the revelation. Anyway, the board answered 10, it pointed out. Chui then spoke up. He said, "Guys, I feel something holding me in place. I've been trying to lift my finger off since it moved this last time, he said, and that's when we all tried to get off the tab and couldn't. That's when Bonnie and Quellite panicked. They started to scream, and Guero tried to keep us all calm. We were held in place by something that was horrifying. We couldn't move. It was like we were frozen in place. Guero again got my other two cousins to stop breathing hard and yelling. Chui and I were crying. Guero said, "We just need to finish the game, guys. We need to stay level-headed." He spoke calmly, but he was scared like the rest of us. Then I asked how we were to finish when we didn't even know how we started. Guero said we would just ask it if it was okay to leave. He took a deep breath and asked the question. It answered, no. Bonnie was a little more calm, but he said maybe we need to ask one more thing before asking if it could release us. Guero asked and who was with us. It spelled out the Satanas, Satan. When I tell you the fear I felt is something I never, ever want to feel again. Once we realized what it said, it went quiet. Mind you, it was bright daylight, but we couldn't hear the wind or anything. It was like time had frozen on us again. Cue the waterworks from Chui, Quellette and I. We were scared shitless. My cousin Guero then asked Satan, can we leave? And again, it said no. There was no calming us when Bonnie began to yell at Guero, and he lost his composure, and he tried again to leave but couldn't. It was like our legs stopped working for us. Guero took a deep breath and said maybe someone new needs to ask if we can leave. And so Quellite asked and the board went crazy. The tab went from side to side, our fingertips still attached, and suddenly we were released and we got up and we ran as fast as we physically could, leaving the board behind. I was sobbing and ran to my nana's house. My cousin Quellite and Tree ran home to their mothers to tell them what happened, while Guero and Bonnie ran to who knows where. I told my nana everything. She was upset, but she had my uncle drive us to where we had left the board, and it was gone. My nana got the boys round up, and they swore they didn't have it. And after digging around in their rooms, the board didn't come up. Then my nana called a priest, had us blessed, and had a healer pray over charm bracelets for protection. We didn't speak of this ever again. My cousins and I went different paths in life. Quellite became a politician, Guero a lawyer, Tree an owner of a cab licensing place, and Bonnie, well, he was a Class A criminal. Now, I won't give a year or where it happened, but Bonnie was murdered when he was 25 years old. He was one of 8 other victims of a supposed serial killer. He was shot twice in the face while he slept. The death was what reunited my cousins and I, and it left us completely mind-blown. The board had told us Bonnie would be killed, and when Quellite asked when it was responded, it just said 10. I still think of this fateful day. Maybe life would have been different if we hadn't played with the board. Maybe Bonnie wouldn't have lived his life so recklessly, waiting for death at his door. I wish we could take it back, but maybe this was fate. That time, I was in the city as I'm a university student in my freshman year. And we're from a small town in a province about 2 to 3 hours away from the city, depends on the traffic. I stay in the dormitory on weekdays and go home at a weekend. When it happened, I was in the city. It was a Saturday morning and I woke up that day totally not feeling well. I couldn't even attend my one and only class on a Saturday. Then, before lunchtime, I still decided to go to school to meet up with some of my classmates. On my way there, I keep receiving text messages from my friends in the province, childhood and high school friends, asking me, are you okay? Hey, have you heard the news? And so on. I have no idea why they kept testing and asking those questions, but when I asked them what is it, what happened, or just why they're asking me if I'm fine, I kind of feel a little worried and uneasy. After I came back to my dormitory, I finished packing a few things I needed to bring home for the weekend and waited for our driver to pick me up. When they arrived, one of my grandma, my grandfather's sister, we call her Mama, she went inside my room. Maybe she's trying to figure out how to open the topic, and then that's it. She told me about what happened to my mom. I was so shocked I couldn't even say a thing. Tears rolled down my face. On the way home, I was so quiet. I'm not talking to anyone, but just crying quietly with my hands on my face. During those days, my mum's wake, I slept alone in my parents' room, hoping that she'd show up in my dreams, but nah. I got pictures, talking to those pics at night before going to sleep, and I placed it under my pillow, hoping that might help to see her in my dreams, but nah. I'm so envious of everyone who was talking about seeing her in their dreams and sharing their dream stories about her, because I cannot understand why, even though I have strong feelings and have been hoping to see her in my dreams, it still didn't happen to me. After the funeral, there is this so-called 40 days, one of those religious beliefs where it's said that the soul of the person who has passed away stays around the close families and loved ones. My mum's family are very religious, so they were all following those beliefs, but I'm not. I do go to church and pray, but I don't believe in it. I'm strongly against it. Days have passed. On Monday morning, I was still at home. I go back to the city every Monday early morning, so my grandma will wake me up around 4:30 a.m. But that one Monday morning, I was dreaming of my mum. I can't remember about what happened in the dream anymore. I just knew that I finally saw her in my dreams, and right before I woke up, I heard a voice, like someone whispering right in my ear saying goodbye. And after I heard it, I woke up with tears, and I kept crying and crying. I've lived in this house pretty much my entire life with my parents, nan, and brother. It's really old. This whole street was built like a couple hundred years ago, and it's really weird. Me and my brother are 90% sure it's actually haunted at this point. Our parents and nan think we're nuts, lol. But honestly, the houses around here are so old, I'm surprised they're not all haunted. My brother says he hears kids' voices at night sometimes. He thinks he's hearing a few really little kids, and it's always been the exact same few voices. And he's been hearing them for more than 10 years. So it's probably not just neighbours talking or a TV or something. He's never been able to hear them very well, so he's only ever caught a couple of words. He's heard the words willow, country, downstairs, and the name Betty really clearly in kids' voices. He's also heard a woman's voice say Thomas once. My room will sometimes randomly have this horrible chemical smell. Like it smells like paint thinner or something. We've never been able to figure out what the smell is coming from. A few years ago, my parents even got the carpet pulled up partly because they thought the smell was in the carpet, but also because the carpet had a bunch of stains on it. I was a messy kid. And nope, it didn't get rid of the smell. We also smell smoke sometimes, when there's really no reason to be smelling smoke. No one's cooking anything, there's no candles, nothing that explains the smell. The smoke alarms even go off sometimes. They've all been replaced and they still do. So it doesn't seem like a problem with the actual alarms. Occasionally, there's also a gross burning smell, like burning rubber or something. We wouldn't have connected the smells to anything paranormal, except we always get this weird, uncomfortable feeling, like something isn't right. And it's the same feeling my brother gets when he hears the voices. Last night, I was smelling the burning smell and the smoke, and my smoke alarm went off. I opened my door to let my mum in because she was carrying the stepladder. Behind her, I saw a pregnant woman in a long, old-fashioned dress, kneeling on the floor with her hands over her face. I only saw her for a split second, but it was so clear. I also got this really sad feeling. I think she was crying or something, and I just felt so sad for her and kind of scared for her. I've had many occasions of dreams coming true. The first time it happened was back in middle school, where I had a dream about a guy bullying a nerd or something. And then I went to him and said, "What's wrong, dude?" Then I punched his stomach, and he punched my face. Nothing special. And after that, I felt the thing where you think that you're falling, and then I woke up. Then, the next day I went to school. Everything was all right until the first or second break, I think. At the back of the school, it was the place where I was finding my peace away from everyone because I was the quiet kid. And suddenly the class bully was threatening a kid to give him some money. In my head, I was like, nah, I'm not going to do anything, just watch. But something supernatural happened. I felt like a mild push on my back, like someone wanted me to do something. I couldn't do anything, so I just stood up and went to the bully. After some talking, he got angry. He said, "You're not going to tell me what to do." And he just punched me in the face. My nose was bleeding. He broke my fucking nose. Then, the same force that pushed me forced me to kick him. He fell down, and I ended up kicking his legs, head, everything I could. The thing that did it wasn't me. It was something else inside me. Fast forward, the teachers came, and I got a week of detention. When I came back to school, the nerd kid thanked me, because the bully stopped annoying him, basically. He stopped bullying everyone. Anyways, when he thanked me, I didn't say anything. I thought that what I did was wrong and should be done again. Also, from this moment, everyone was thinking that I was going to bring a gun to school or something. Don't judge quiet kids by the memes. We're just antisocial guys that want someone to talk to them. Another occasion was when I had a dream where the popular kid, he wasn't really popular. The thing was, his father owned like a business. The kid was just a jerk. So the dream wasn't anything special. He was just going out with my crush. I approached them and I said something that really pissed him off. I couldn't realize what I said. It just pissed him off. The other thing that happened was the feeling of falling that, by the way, happened almost every time that one of my dreams came true. So I went to school the next day, and it was at PE. We were playing football. The people that were choosing teams were this jerk and another guy. He had chosen like 4 or 5 dudes, and he asked, "Who should I pick next?" The other guys told him, "Pick him." They were mentioning me. He said, "Nah, he's useless." I'm 100% sure that he did it on purpose. Also, I was actually a really good defender. Anyways, the other team picked me. At the game, I was really pissed after he said that, and a voice inside me said, "Cut him off." And the next thing I did was like the tackle of the century. I got the ball, and he had fallen down on his own just to take a penalty. After the game, he said, "Listen, kid." By the way, I was older than him by 10 months or something. "I know that you have a crush on her," he said as he pointed to my crush. "If you do something like that again, I'm going to destroy all your dreams." Then, this supernatural thing made me push him. It had taken control again. I pushed him and he fell down, but fortunately some other dudes came and grabbed me away from him. I was just like a beast that couldn't do anything, just cuss and scream loudly. Fast forward to the next day, he came to school, and as soon as I got in class, he was fucking hugging with my crush. I came up to him and said, "So, you're playing dirty, aren't you?" It didn't really bother me. I didn't have a chance anyway. When the bell rang, they were on a date. "Of course they're going out," I said. Then the voice happened again and said, go and destroy him, but it didn't take over me. I went to him on my own will and just talked to the girl. I told her that he just wanted her for something like a week, and then ended it all just to annoy me. This guy was angry and didn't have to do anything. He said that they're actually in love, and then he kissed the girl right in front of me. I calmly said to the girl, "Listen, he'll forget about you. It's all just a game." The guy told me to leave, and that's what I did. 2 weeks later, he just broke up with the girl, and that was it. The voice didn't happen again. At least, I haven't let it take over me. There were many occasions or dreams coming true, but these were the most interesting that I had. Maybe I should have gone to a psychologist or something for the voice, but I couldn't do anything about dreams coming true. It just happened. It's like I'm living in a matrix of some kind. It all started when I was around 3 years old. I started having this weird dream every night where a tall shadow figure with red eyes would pull me to a dark place in my old house and kill me. I repeatedly had this dream for 3 years until I was old enough to understand what it was and became lucid. I killed that thing and never had the dream again. From ages 14 to 17, I started seeing those shadow figures, but in real life. They were shorter and didn't have eyes. At first, I felt like I was crazy or it was caused by the school stress. Until I searched on the internet and I found a website with the exact description of the figures I saw. I started doing more research, but saw none talking about dreams or shadow men being around them for years. I got used to them. They'd escape extremely fast as soon as I noticed them. They never said anything or tried to hurt me in real life. Until one day, I was on the bed of my bedroom. I was around 16 years old when this happened, chilling on my phone until I saw another shadow figure, but it was different. What I'm going to say now happened in like 3 or 4 seconds. At first, I did nothing, as always. But when I realized it wasn't disappearing, I looked at it. I felt terrorized. I wasn't actually afraid myself. It's like if that being was feeding from my fear and was causing it. I can also describe the shadow. It was around 2.5 meters tall, much bigger than the other shadow figures I saw, and again, it had red eyes. It looked very muscular, and the edges of the shadow figure were making some sort of electric waves. I started calling my parents, screaming, but as soon as they could have had the eyes on that big shadow figure, it disappeared. It didn't run or anything, just disappeared, but my parents saw my terrified face. I was trembling. Now, I'm almost 20 years old and haven't seen those figures for at least 2 years. I've always been able to see shadow people or things from the corner of my eyes. They're almost always fleeting for me, but this one experience is one of the most memorable ones I've ever had with a shadow person. I was 19 at the time and still living with my parents and all my siblings in the house. Me and my older sister, A's room, was side by side, and my younger sister, R's room, was directly opposite from mine. Our bathroom was in between mine and R's room, and the stairs were opposite of the bathroom door. So from the bathroom door, mine and A's room was on the left, and R's room was on the right. You could see the whole upper half of the stairs and the stair bend from the bathroom doorway. One day, I was brushing my teeth before bed and was talking to A, who was standing at the door of the bathroom. Then she moved away when I took off my glasses to wash my face. I saw something move in the corner of my eye and I glanced at it, and because I didn't have my glasses on, I couldn't clearly see who it was. But it was the obvious shape of a person going down the stairs. The thing I saw was dark because the lights were off, but the bathroom light was bright enough to illuminate the stairs. I thought it was A going downstairs, so I called to her, to get me a glass of water when she comes up. Suddenly, she popped in from the left side of the doorway and asked, "What did you say?" Confused, I asked her, "Wait, weren't you going downstairs?" I looked behind her, and the shadow was gone. She replied, "No, I was in my room." I said, "But I saw you going downstairs." Once again, she said, "I was in my room." I argued that I literally saw her going down the steps, till she denied it, and then R opened her room door to ask us why we were so noisy. If A and R had been in their rooms when I saw the things, then what the fuck was it? There was nothing in the way of the light that could have cast a shadow, and our bathroom has no window for any other light to shine in. So I've concluded that it could have only been a shadow person that I saw. I live in a suburban area in the South US. I work in construction safety, so I often have to get up at 3 or 4 am. Today, I got up at 4 am to be on site at 5. I get up and get dressed and get all my stuff normally. The first part of this started as soon as I went out the back door and onto my screened-in porch. The first thing that happened was that I heard two distinct knocks off to my left near where our AC unit sits right outside our baby's nursery. It wasn't the AC unit because it wasn't on. It's cold in the mornings now, and it doesn't usually kick on until after the sun rises. It also didn't sound like the boards of the porch creaking. It was two very distinct knocks. I searched around with my phone lights, but didn't see anything unusual. This already put me in a creepy mood, but I didn't see anything weird and I had to go to work, so I got in my truck and drove to the Kangaroo about 5 minutes away. The Kangaroo gas station sits at a four-way stop intersection. Most people that live around here don't get up nearly as early as I do, because it's a nicer area that they mostly have corporate jobs that don't require you to wake up before sunrise. So I park at the pump and get out, and start the process of using my fleet vehicle gas card at the pump. Then I notice what I can only describe as a badly played recorder flute, playing a 5-note melody. That's a weird thing to be doing at 4 am, but okay. I look around, and there are 0 other cars or people. There's not even a dude at the gas station counter. I get an even creepier vibe since when I start to look around searching for the flute source, I notice that the unseen flautist starts holding the 3rd note. The whole time I'm swiveling my head around to look, the note is held. When I go back to the process of getting gas, having given up on looking, it plays the last 2 notes of the phrase. I felt like I was being taunted. I see the clerk coming from the bathroom and sit down behind the counter, so I decide to go in. I lock the truck and let the pump keep pumping as I go in to get coffee and some beef jerky. While I'm walking the distance to the gas station store doors, it plays the whole melody again, quickly. Now let me say, there's no music going on, and it's definitely not coming from the pumps. It's not a recording since it's variable and seems to be reacting to me. It's also not coming from a car or a house, since there are none of those things close enough for me to hear it. It's all closed businesses. I also couldn't find the direction it was coming from. It seemed to be coming from everywhere. As I stop at the door to look around again, it holds the 3rd note again. I look for a second and it keeps holding it. I give up looking again, and as I'm opening the door to walk in, it plays the last 2 notes again in a distinctly taunting way. What the fuck, man? I asked the gas station clerk about it, and he really said that it's creepy around 3 to 4 am every night, and that he doesn't go outside. As I was leaving out of the store and getting my truck going again, I could hear it holding that 3rd note faintly the whole time. I'm a musician, and it sounded to me like the melody had a Celtic or Scottish vibe to it, like Irish folk songs would, or medieval tavern-type music. It was only 5 notes, and that's not that much harmonic context, but there was definitely the vibe. Who or what is up at 4 a.m. taunting people with a badly played flute melody and they get gas? He didn't feel like a person. For context, I am someone that has bouts of disturbing sleep paralysis. We also have had some weird activity with unexplained light flashes and moving objects that I believe are related to my mother's death and the birth of my daughter. So I'm new to Reddit, so apologies if I have no clue what I'm doing. I'm also a very bad writer. I've lived in the same house my whole life, up until about 3 years ago, when I moved into my current home. It's very nice, and my neighbours are very friendly. However, since day one, I've been having problems with weird noises like footsteps and knocks, even though I live alone, with the exception of my cat. It's a newer house, so I don't know if it could or should be making those noises. I've kind of gotten used to them. They don't bother me anymore. I was laid off early January due to the business I was working with shutting down. I spent a lot of time at home, obviously. Things started to ramp up. Things would move in my house. Glasses that I know I would only put in specific places. I remember one time I had just set my glass of tea down and went to grab it again and it was halfway across the room. I think that's when I realised something was happening. I had a set of wine glasses sitting on my coffee table. Both of them went flying and hit the wall across the room, maybe a good 7 feet away. Part of me wants to believe it's a family member or something like that, but the energy I feel in the house sometimes is just a gross feeling. I don't know how to explain it, it just feels heavy. Over the last week, it has been extremely bad. I continuously see things out of the corner of my eye. I've heard doors open and close, cabinets too. I'm extremely skeptical. I'm also an atheist, if that matters. I occasionally have dreams, maybe like once a month at the most. The normal weird stuff. The past 2 nights I've been having the same exact nightmare. Weird shadow man things standing over my bed. I can't move. I just stay like that for hours. I'm not sure if it's sleep paralysis or something like that. The dreams are bad enough, but there's also been things happening. The drawers in my kitchen will fly open randomly. Sometimes just one and sometimes all of them. I can't seem to get anything on camera. I have tried. I'm trying to look into some security cameras, but they are quite expensive. And honestly, I'm short on money due to the pandemic. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Okay, I don't know where to start. I'll try not to make it that long. So the other nights, I would say 2 nights ago, I was sleeping in the living room because my house right now has a lot of mosquito infestation. And my landlord bug-bombed the house, especially my room. So I had to sleep on the living room and wait 24 hours to go back in. Anyways, I was sleeping on the couch and around 6 a.m, I turned around because I have a really bad hip, so I was trying to turn around and sleep on the other side. I opened my eyes like I normally do because I have really bad insomnia as it is. But that night I was actually sleeping well until when I looked up by the TV. There was this really tall apparition wearing orange and white. I don't know what the gender was of the apparition, but I feel like it was a man because of how tall he was. I'm not saying women can't be tall, but he was tall, very tall, like basketball height. I'm tall myself, so I'm just saying. It just looked like a tall man. I couldn't really see the colour of their skin, but all I could remember was that they were standing in front of the TV. But they were covering their face with their hands and just standing there not moving. Of course, I freaked the fuck out. I went underneath the covers and turned around to the other side where my hip was hurting, but I didn't care. It just scared me. I know my house is haunted. My landlord told me that there were some hauntings, and we live near a forest where there's a lot of murders and suicides that happened. I have seen a shadow figure before, but that was back in 2019. And it was basically my door opening by itself, and I thought it was my mom checking up on me. So I said her name and she didn't say anything. So the door opened by itself, and all of a sudden there was this black, tall apparition looking at me in my room. My cat, who died in 2020, was even hissing at my door when I was underneath the covers all night. That happened around 3 a.m., which is possibly spirits roaming around, but that was back in 2019. I was about 16 years old when my family purchased a fixer-upper home in a relatively nice neighbourhood. By no means was it a dump, but it certainly needed work. Upon moving in, we were informed the house had in the past served as a home healthcare facility for the elderly. There were no strange feelings about it. Our family was quite excited to have a new home to start fresh. My father and I began by ripping up all of the flooring and laying new tile throughout, knocking out some walls, redoing the kitchen counters, etc. Next was the backyard. It was basically just a dirt lot with a little porch. On the porch was a laundry room, a tiny little shed near the back door. The first strange thing we noticed was there were multiple locks on it. The odd part was the locks were on the inside of the laundry room. The door was rather heavy. I don't believe it was wood, but it was dense material. On the inside of that door was a tiny child-sized imprint. Not in paint or dust, but it was impressed into the door. This baffled us for the longest time. My brother and I began tearing up the yard, getting ready to seed it, and my brother hit something hard that made a ding sound. We kept digging around it until we decided to pause. We didn't want a massive hole in the yard. My father's curiosity got the best of him, and he decided we should dig until we unearthed whatever it was. We dug a massive hole and discovered an entire twin bed frame, black and rusty. In addition, we found several small plastic children's toys, many of which appeared to be partially melted. This officially gave us all the creeps. Over the next few months, strange things started to happen. Our two dogs would stand and stare down the hallway, growling and barking with their hair on end. Every time this would happen, we would all pause and watch. This became more frequent until they began going into my room at the end of the hall and repeating this staring into my closet. This was obviously unnerving, but ultimately decided that there was nothing to worry about. They were just being good boys. Sometime later, I remember waking up in the middle of the night and feeling an extremely dark, oppressive feeling, like I was being watched. I sat up and looked around the room, and there was nothing but the fear, and the energy was paralyzing. I was roughly 17 at the time, and I began sleeping with my head under the covers. Every now and then, I would wake up in the middle of the night, and that feeling of being watched. The fear was so heavy, I wouldn't even look above my comforter, fearing I would see something large and ominous staring back. I told my father about this, and although he believed me, there was nothing to be done about it. A few months later, that all came to a head, when I awoke to someone shouting my name in the deepest, raspiest voice. I jumped out of my bed and flew to my door at lightning speed. I threw it open to find my entire family staring back from their respective bedroom doors. "Who the hell screamed my name?" I said. Everyone just stared at each other, visibly shaken, and stated they all heard their names screamed as well. Things intensified from there. Things moving or being knocked off of shelves. In the movies, it's always something small, only noticed by someone alone, but in our case, it was always on full display for whoever was there. My brother's football team was over one day in the living room, eating and playing Xbox, while my dad cooked, when several items on the top of our entertainment centre went flying several feet. This was not the case of items rolling off of an uneven surface. These were signed baseballs and footballs flying off and hitting the wall. The football players took off, running through the front door. By this point, my family had grown used to the strange happenings, and after standing there taking it all in, we picked up the items and went about our day. The next significant event was when my dad's friend was over sitting on the couch.
These were not tiny people, rather heavy set. All three on the couch were mid-conversation. The couch moved several inches to the left, screeching across the floor quickly. This startled me and I jumped. I've never seen anyone move as fast as those three people on the couch. You'd have thought we had ejector seats. A short time later, I was coming home from work in the early evening. I pulled into the carport and saw the door was wide open. I knew immediately something was off. I apprehensively peeked in and saw the back door was also open. I walked in and immediately felt a feeling of dread as I looked around and saw every door, cabinet, and drawer in the kitchen wide open. Thinking myself a tough guy, I grabbed a knife and decided to search the home while yelling out for my family or whatever potential intruder may be there. When I got to that dark hallway and stared down it, I knew something wasn't right. The fear overshadowed whatever courage I thought I had, and I ran out and called my father. They were out walking the dogs. They ran home and saw everything opened. We searched the home. No one was there. Things got very dark in our home. Everyone was always angry and fighting. Families have issues, but this was constant, almost unexplainably. So when looking back at it, I started having these moments where it was like daydreaming, but deeper and more vivid. I couldn't hear people around me. It was like being somewhere else. Finally, one day, a girlfriend of mine was over. I was sitting there on the edge of my bed, staring into my closet where I had my entertainment center, when I dozed off into one of these daydreams. I saw my girlfriend take my phone and walk it into my dining room, where my family was sitting and sat it behind my dad's records to prank me. When I snapped to, I stood up casually, walked into the dining room, moved to the records and grabbed the phone. My girlfriend and entire family stood there with their jaws on the floor. How did you know where that was? I asked. I started saying, well, I saw her put it there. As I said this, I started to realize how bizarre that sounded and started to feel freaked out, now seeing them stare at me like a crazy person. I just walked out the door, started my car, and went on a date. I came up several times, and to this day, I don't like talking about it. It was too strange. There were many more events. These are just the highlights. I was glad when they sold that house. Whatever the explanation for all those things, they were creepy as hell.
I live in south central Pennsylvania, Appalachia, deep, deep, deep in the sticks. I work night shift, so on my off days, I tend to stay up at night. So I was binging on Netflix and just relaxing at about 2 or 3 in the morning when I heard a knock on an exterior wall of my single wide trailer, about midway down the trailer. It's just one hard knock, more like a thump. Instantly, hair up on my neck. I felt the thump. I paused my show and listened for a few minutes. Nothing. I shrugged it off. Go back to watching my show and hear another one on the other side of the trailer. A little concerned this time. Draw my handgun and go to the door. I am who I am, I always have one. As I'm reaching for the handle, I get a solid urge to not open the door. So I don't. I sit down on the couch and listen, as I'm thoroughly bugged. Nothing else the rest of the night. Next night, same thing. Watching Netflix, and I hear a lot of shuffling in the yard. Draw my Glock and step up on the deck. I shine the pistol-mounted light off the deck. The house is surrounded by deer. Not abnormal for where I'm at. All the deer start kind of bouncing away except one. It's bigger. Proportions were way off. It's just kind of outside of where my light reaches. I've got alarm bells going off in my head. I point my Glock at it, and it just starts walking away at an angle. Walking all jerky, not bouncing. While it's walking, it's still staring at me with both eyes. Kind of a crazy angle to have its head turned, considering the way it's walking. I watch it walk in the woods and go back inside. Next night, I'm at work. I come home and my girlfriend says, "Can you get a handgun out of the safe, load it, and put it in the bedroom closet?" I say, "Sure, why?" Apparently, she was up breastfeeding my newborn. She said she heard one loud knock on the door, and it gave her the creeps. Kid freaked out too. Didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't tell her about the knocks at night that I'd experienced. I'm pretty sure the deer thing was a not deer. I've seen one before on a country road, I think. That was years ago. Around 11 at night, I was driving and I saw something at human height on the road, with photoluminescent eyes look at me and walk into the woods. Gave me the creeps. I'm more wondering about the knocking on my trailer's walls. What am I dealing with? Any help appreciated.
I moved to a new apartment back in March. It's not super old, but it's not super new. As far as I know, nothing bad has happened here. For the first couple of weeks, nothing happened. I had some nightmares and trouble sleeping, but I chalked it up to the move. We did move here from another country, so there was plenty of stress that could have caused that. Then about a month in, I saw something. You know that part of sleep when you're kind of in between sleep and awake? Things are a little fuzzy, reality starts to shift a bit and your brain has some weird thoughts like, I need to remember to eat the soap tomorrow or something. Well, during that part of sleep, I saw a dark figure at the far end of my room. I couldn't make out any features, but I knew it was looking at me. I instantly woke up and woke my husband up, but the figure was gone, so I just attributed it to stress nightmares again. A couple of months later, still during that in-between state, I saw something crawling on the floor between the wall and my side of the bed. Our bed is pushed almost up against the wall on my side, with only a small sliver of the floor showing, so there's not enough room for anyone to walk or stand there or anything. But I saw something that looked to be the size of a teenage girl just crawling like a bug on the floor there. Again, I woke my husband up, but there was nothing there. By this point, the stress nightmares should have gone away, so I'm starting to freak out. Still another couple of months later, once again during that in-between state, I saw this horrible witch-like figure rising up from the floor on my side of the bed. She had this long dark hair, glowing yellow eyes and sharp teeth. Her hands were gripping the mattress, and she was just slowly rising up, glaring at me with such hatred. I've never seen anyone look at me that way, and I can still see it when I think about it, and it just churns my stomach. At that point, I was starting to think I should post here for advice, but I was afraid to write about it in the apartment, and there wasn't anywhere else I could go, so I just didn't. But last night, I decided I needed help. I was fully asleep and mid-dream when this happened. I don't remember my dream, it was unrelated to whatever was happening, but suddenly I started hearing screaming. I realised that it was me, and my husband was waking me up because I was screaming in my sleep. As I was coming back to consciousness, I could feel a literal hand on my ankle. As soon as I was fully awake, the hand just vanished. Not pulled away, just disappeared. But for the next 3 hours, I could still feel a warmth on my ankle where it was. No matter how I moved, I could still feel it. I know this isn't sleep paralysis, I've had that before, and this is nothing like it. I can move, I can wake up, and I don't see scary things in the corner of my room, other than these specific things. I'm also not sure why this is only happening when I'm asleep or almost asleep. Nothing else in the apartment is haunted. No shadows, no movement, no voices, etc. We do have a long hallway that sketches me out whenever I walk past it, but I'm pretty sure that's just me being freaked out by the dark. Also, I'm not sure if this is relevant, but the people who lived here before us moved out before their lease was up, and they even paid for our first month of rent so we could move in. At first I thought it was just because they were nice, but now I'm starting to wonder if they were just that desperate to leave. I still have their contact info, so I'm thinking about texting them, but I really don't want them to think I'm crazy, as we aren't exactly friends. I also haven't told my husband about this. He doesn't believe in this stuff, and he brushes me off when I talk about other paranormal things. Does anyone have any advice? I'm really freaked out, and I don't know what to do here. I currently live in the United States. Out of college, I took a job in Australia on a horse farm. I was 21 and it was my first major job. I loved it. When I arrived, I moved into the original home on the property, which was smack bang in the middle of 400 acres. Close by to the main house and the barns, but fenced and had considerable privacy, and no one bothered us. During my time there, we had an influx of seasonal workers coming and going, and the owner travelled frequently to other farms and overseas. So much of the time I would be left alone on the property in the evenings. The house itself was a moderate-sized rancher. 3 bedrooms, 1 bath shower, and laundry room. We mainly used the back sliding glass door to come and go from the house. On the day I moved in, the sliding glass door rollers were broken. It was old and heavy glass, and you had to lift it and push it hard to open it. But the back entrance went to the garden, had nice views, and it's where we frequented for tea breaks. As soon as I moved in, I immediately got feelings of being watched, but I wasn't hearing anything. A few weeks after the move, I had an almost lucid dream. I was laying in bed. When I looked up, at the foot of my bed stood a woman in a full-length dress. Purple lace, high neck and sleeves. Looked 1890s maybe? The woman looked to be middle-aged, maybe late 40s or 50s. Her hair was pinned up in a bun on top. The only way I knew she was upset at my presence was the look on her face. She looked like she wanted me out. She didn't say anything, didn't move. Just stood there staring, and suddenly I awoke and she was gone. I had this same dream many times while I lived there. The only thing that changed was her face. It seemed to soften the longer I was there, but occasionally she looked angry or upset. After a time, I believed that she resided in the home with us and was just there. She didn't seem to do much around the house other than watch and show up in dreams. She actually has little to do with this story, other than to give context to what I believe was in the house up to this point. So let's fast forward to 5 months later. All my previous housemates have left, and it's just me in the house now. I had a nice day at work on the farm. It was a busy and bustling day. Lots of people on the property. It was winter in Australia, if you want to call it that, so the days were a bit shorter. I climbed into bed around 8, my norm, and I usually just sit with my laptop and play games, browse the web, or make calls home to family in the US. So I've been in bed probably about an hour now, just relaxing. It's dark out. Suddenly, I hear the sliding glass door push open and someone take 4 heavy steps into the house. It sounded like heavy work boots and it shook the house. Everything went suddenly quiet. I freaked. I jumped up and grabbed whatever I could find, which happened to be an old heavy shot glass. We didn't have a lot of corks, and I'm not a big drinker, it's just what we had. And my alarm clock, which was one of those old ringing ones with the hammer between 2 bells. I guess I figured I'd throw stuff at the intruder. No one ever entered the house without a knock or at least a call out. After a few minutes of getting my nerve up, I entered the hallway and walked into the kitchen. No one was there. No person, no boots, and the sliding glass door was closed. I never heard it close, only open. I opened the sliding glass door and called out. I grabbed a flashlight and beamed it around, looking for anyone. I was panicked and looking for answers, so I desperately called the farm manager to see if he had stopped by. He answered. I asked if he had been there. He said no. I said, well, maybe the owner had stopped by looking for me, and he corrected me. He said the owner was with him and they were 2 hours away at the races. and that there shouldn't be anyone else at the property. At this point, I was very unnerved. I spent the next 4 hours calling family overseas and unable to sleep. Many weeks after this, I ran into one of the farmhands who had left prior to the event, and he mentioned he didn't have a real bed while he stayed at the house. We kind of laughed about it, and I was like, you should have asked for a bed frame or something. He slept with the mattress on the floor. The room he stayed in was right off the kitchen and directly across from the sliding glass doors. Somehow we got on the topic of the kitchen lights being left on at night. I was always first to bed, so I never turned it off, and even after everyone left, I just continued to leave it on, not thinking about it, at least not consciously. He mentioned he never turned it off either, and in fact would always turn it on before heading to bed if it wasn't already. When I asked why, he said it was because he often heard footsteps in the kitchen, and he could see light under his bedroom door, and wanted to see if anyone was there. He never saw shadows, or anyone else for that matter.
Back in maybe 2006, I was about 5 years old, and my parents were in the process of moving house. Because of the time the property purchase was taking, we had to move into a small cottage near the seaside in Devon. I at first liked the place. It had nice views and was rather cozy inside with its 19th century feel. It was, however, built right next to the town church, most likely on a few graves as well. Anyway, I was loving my first few weeks there. I had a nice spacious room and I was living right by the sea. However, after a short period of moving in, strange things began to happen to my family. One day, after I arrived home from school with my mum, we noticed my dad, who had been working at home that day, was rather shaken up. He went on to say that he'd been working on his laptop in the lounge when he'd suddenly heard somebody stomping around right above him. At first, he was afraid somebody had broken in, and being the fairly burly man he is, he climbed the short flight of stairs to confront whoever it was. He found nobody upstairs. I should also mention as well, for any immediate skeptics, that throughout my whole time living there, we never had any neighbours because the houses next to ours were holiday homes for renting. The footsteps continued. All of us heard them. I heard them a few times when sitting watching telly with my parents. Plus, visitors to the house heard them. But the happenings didn't stop there. It was actually my dad who saw and heard most of what happened, and he's always been reluctant to believe in anything paranormal. He often said that at about 3 o'clock, some nights he would hear a click, and on would come the bathroom light directly across the landing from his room. It was a pull cord switch. He checked the switch and never found any faulty wiring or anything that could cause it to come on randomly. That, and we often found the taps in the sink or bath running at full blast, and they were stiff to turn on anyway. I remember when my older cousin, who was about 8 at the time, came to stay for Christmas. None of us actually mentioned what we'd seen or heard to him or his parents, because by that point we'd gotten so used to it. Now, he was staying in my room. His dad was sleeping downstairs. To this very day, he tells me that the second he entered our house, he felt as though something was watching him. And this is a man who has a degree in physics and will often look for a logical explanation for anything unusual. He said that when everyone had gone to sleep, me included, he, however, remained wide awake, as the feeling of discomfort had worsened. While sitting up in bed, he told me that he saw the shadow of someone's feet under the beam of the landing lights poking under the door. What was strange was that despite the old structure of our house, there was no sound of footsteps or creaking floorboards. He said that the feet stopped outside my door for about 10 seconds before moving on. Another time he visited, both his parents came. I remember one terrifying occurrence. Under the stairs was a small guest bedroom. It honestly felt like a cupboard. I can't remember the reason why, but I ended up having to share that room with my aunt. Anyway, it was about 4 in the morning when I was being kept awake by her snoring that I heard something. The door was slightly ajar, and I began to hear the sound of children giggling in the lounge. I didn't dare move a muscle in my sleeping bag. I just stayed still and listened. It carried on for maybe 5 minutes, seemingly getting louder. I eventually managed to drift back to sleep about half an hour after it stopped. The most conclusive paranormal experience, in my opinion, came about 2 months before we moved out. We had many of my relatives and young cousins over for a gathering. Me being the youngest, I was always a very hyper child, even though I've grown up to be shy and quiet person. I would always go over the top and be told to cool down. On this occasion, I'd pushed my mum too far, and she told me to sit on the stairs with the door to the lounge closed until I calmed down. That was when I saw something that would burn itself into my mind forever. Because of the short flight of stairs to reach the landing, I couldn't help but get the feeling of being watched as I sat at the bottom, and I just so happened to turn around and be greeted by the sight of a dark figure standing at the top. It was like a watery, see-through figure of a person. I couldn't make out what gender. I saw it. We stayed there, vision locked for what seemed like ages, but was probably only seconds. It then began to almost glide along the landing. I watched it as it passed my bedroom door and entered my parents' room. For some reason, I decided to follow it after I entered the room. I made my way up the stairs and flicked the light on my parents' room. There was nothing there. After a pretty dismal experience working at a supermarket, I had spent over a year applying for a new position, but it landed me no success. However, within a year, I was beginning to pull myself together. I began training as a hairdresser in the north of England, whilst at the same time continuing to look for a source of additional income. After a couple of weeks searching in my local city, I found an advertisement for a supervisor's job at a newsagent's. At first, I felt apprehensive about working in retail again, but after discovering that the staff of 6 were as friendly as could possibly be, I decided to give it a go. On the day of the interview, the manager led me through the downstairs stockroom and up a short, narrow flight of stairs to a small office. Once in there, she asked me the common interview questions and ended up telling me she thought I seemed a friendly and respectful individual and was willing to let me start the job almost immediately. Yet what I didn't realise was this interview was not going to be categorised as anything fundamentally average. After the basic employment paperwork was sorted, she offered to take me on a quick tour of the upstairs stockrooms, to which I casually accepted. So, leading me through an opening directly next to the doorway of the office, me and her entered the stockroom. It was a neatly laid out place. Items were stocked in a systematic order around the room. Directly ahead of the entrance to the room was a small kitchen as well. However, after leading me back out in the hallway, the manager led me through a doorway and down a rather tired-looking corridor. The outcome was the derelict remains of what seemed like the setup of an old flat. Soft drinks were stored in one room which had a large window facing directly out into the street. Opposite this room was what seemed to be an old dining room or kitchen. In it was what seemed to be any decorative or display items left over from the shop floor. It basically seemed like a storeroom for rubbish. And out in the hallway of these 2 rooms was a short flight of stairs with a half-spaced landing leading up to the next floor. On this landing was a large Georgian-style window, which lit the hallway up significantly with daylight. Upon entering the storeroom, the manager abruptly asked me a simple question. "How do you feel about ghosts, by the way?" I was slightly taken by surprise when she asked me this. "Well," I said, "I'm a firm believer. Why? Don't tell me you've got one." "We do indeed," she said. "She's an old lady called Connie. We've actually had somebody walk into the shop with his family and tell us he could sense something upstairs. He told us that Connie was the old resident of the building, when it was still a house." "How did she die then?" I asked. "According to the psychic, she got trapped in a walk-in cupboard in the empty flat above us and eventually died. If you feel like doubting what he said, I've had delivery drivers come in and tell us that there's an old lady looking out of the window above the front door. Have any of you seen her? I questioned. No, she replied, but we hear things pretty often. Although, if you do come up here to fetch any stock, just make sure you say hi to her. Out of my instinctive fear of the unknown, I decided then and there to introduce myself to the spirit. Hi, Connie. My name's... Nice to meet you. I'm the new employee. Mere seconds after I'd spoken, a loud bang came from upstairs, along with the sound of shuffling feet. Me and the manager looked up at the ceiling. Her expression was one of expectation, whereas I simply laughed in sheer disbelief. Was that her? I said. Remaining silent, the manager nodded. My job began with a lot of till work, along with the enlisted care of the alcohol replenishment. I would often have to make trips upstairs throughout the day. All this time I would greet Connie in a pleasant manner and chat away to her as if she were there in the flesh. Yet after a couple of weeks, I began to learn just how powerful a spirit she was. During a morning shift, my colleague was helping me serve during a busy rush, and upon a customer's request for a packet of cigarettes, my colleague turned around and opened the cabinet. Without hesitation, nearly every packet of cigarettes stacked up came flying out of the open door of the cabinet and pelted him. Another experience was when I was locking up at the end of the day and turning the lights out upstairs. Making my way to the stairs, I bid Connie good night. The moment I looked away, however, I heard feet stomping on the wooden floor of the corridor towards the stockroom. The footsteps were approaching me as well. Fear overtook me, and I just bolted down the stairs and out of the staff exit. During my time settling into the job, I would often hear footsteps above the shop floor and hear objects being thrown around. Occasionally, I swore I could hear a voice moaning as well. Whilst carrying stock down the stairs one day, I turned around at the bottom only to see a pair of knee-high legs in stockings and wearing buckled shoes following me down the staircase. Although, what I didn't know was the most conclusive paranormal experience in my mind was yet to come. It was the day of a large delivery, and I was tasked with carrying most of the stock upstairs. I managed this pretty easily within a couple of hours. However, once we reopened the shop, my boss realised she had forgotten to take up a box of thermal paper rolls. So because I had just finished restocking crisps, she asked me to take them up to the flat while she served the customers. Reluctantly, I complied. I walked down the corridor slowly, feeling so apprehensive that I began to hold my breath. I peered into the derelict kitchen and told Connie I would only be quick. Hurriedly, I walked into the room and placed the box next to the old sink. However, once I turned around to leave, a couple of old but nevertheless large display stands laying on the floor rattled loudly. I turned my head and saw them moving across the floor towards me with a frightening speed. I felt as if I was going to vomit, and nearly tripped and fell as I tried to run away so fast. I sprinted down the corridor and back down the stairs into the shop. My boss could only fall into hysterics when she saw my face was as pale as a sheet, and the fact that I was hyperventilating. From that day on, I refused to ever enter the flat again. Even my colleagues felt the same way. I still see and hear the occasional visit from Connie, but over the past few months she has calmed down significantly. Put it this way, what I at first deemed would be a boring retail job turned out to be an experience beyond the comprehension of what I believed I would see and hear in my life.
If say about over a year ago now at this point is when this happened. But some background info at the time of the event. My dad lives in Indiana, and he's got roughly 14 acres of land around his home. Some farm, mostly wood. Now I remember driving up to his place to see him for a couple days, since we haven't met up in a while. And by the time I got there, it was roughly 11 at night or so. He said he was going to wait out in the shop for me. He has out a little distance away from the house. When I pull up, I get out and we have the usual greetings and hang out a little to just catch up. As we're standing outside, I start to hear random sticks cracking in the distance, assuming at least 40 yards away at most. And about the second or third time there was a crack, my dad goes silent. I had a feeling something was off. About that time, we both hear this shout or shriek or something in our direction. It sounded like a man shouting, "Hey," but in a tone that wasn't normal by any sense of the word. Almost like as if someone were to scream or shout after getting through something extremely exhausting and their throat was dry. The only difference was that it wasn't fate when we heard the yell. It was loud, almost like they were 20 or 30 feet from us. It wasn't a sound your average person could have put out. Immediately, my dad walks to his truck, hands me his handgun he carries in his truck, and gets his gun out, always concealed carrying. We stand there in silence. At this point, the rustling in the woods becomes more active, almost as if the sound is moving faster towards us. My dad pulls out his flashlight, one of those that have the LEDs in them, and is blinding as hell and starts walking to the edge of the property where the bonfire is located. When he shines the light down, we see about 20 or 30 yards out, something down in the valley. We couldn't get a clear image on whatever it was, but we both saw was the eyes. Big eyes. The light hit them, and it was like the flashlight was coming right back at us through them. Just white was all we could see coming back at us. As soon as he hears it shout one last time, my dad yells back, "Hey, this motherfucker," and unloads his whole clip into that general area. Silence. After that, we wait. It was about 10 minutes of us standing there just waiting for any noise or response. After we didn't hear anything, we decided it's time to head in for the night. I've never been able to properly figure out what that was or what had happened. At this point, I already knew about Wendigos and skinwalkers, but I was just never sure what it was. Anyone have any ideas? This has happened to me maybe 5 or so times in my life. I'll wake up and immediately open my eyes for whatever reason, and I'll see something in front of me. Several times it has been a red spider web or string, just sort of floating in the air. I'll look at it and then close my eyes and do a double take to make sure it's still there, and it will be. It just starts to feel like my vision is kind of fuzzy. Then it will start to fade into nothing and I won't see it anymore. This process usually takes around 5 to 7 seconds and it feels very weird. I feel like I can't trust what my eyes are showing me, but if it's a hallucination, then it's more visually vivid than most psychedelic experiences I've had. Most of the time with the red string, I sort of feel weird afterwards, like I'm looking at the world in a new way. One time, however, I had an experience like this at my girlfriend's apartment that was quite scary. I woke up sleeping on my side, and I was facing her closet. In her closet, I saw an old woman hunched over with her eyes wide in a crazed stare. She then leapt up and flew right over the bed and let out a guttural yell. It made me scream, and I woke up my girlfriend because I basically had a panic attack after that. It felt so real, and it just shook me to my core. Has anyone ever had an experience like this before? I've heard about sometimes people hallucinating right before or after sleep, but the nature of these feel different, and I'm curious for your insights. In my town, a lot of the houses are old, so I've actually lived in many active places, but the house my husband and I bought 2 years ago is very haunted. And maybe not all by nice things. The house is 120 years old, but it was flipped, so it's also like it's brand new. It's really kind of odd how the old and new have come together here. When we moved in, I felt such a lovely energy in the house. The flipper had told us he'd used this house to teach his son the business of restoring a house, and they'd spent 9 months bonding over it. So I felt it was their energy I picked up on. He also told us that when we acquired it at auction, it had been badly vandalised as it had been empty 6 years. It had still been furnished. There was even still rotten food in the long dormant fridge, as though the previous owners had just got up and walked away one day. For a long time, the only thing that would happen was that one of us in the family would suddenly catch a whiff of cigarette smoke. It would always be when the family member was feeling upset or anxious at something, and the smell would come with a deep sense of peace, sort of like someone was hugging or comforting us. That actually still happens. Normally, only one person in the room will smell the smoke at a time. About 6 months later, after we moved in, a car ran into our house. It hit the wall where my husband and I were sleeping. FYI, being woken up by a car hitting right outside your bed sucks. The car penetrated the siding, broke the studs, cracked the drywall and the baseboard, and then stopped. A couple moments later, I was sitting in the rear of an SUV with the hatch up, watching a baseball game when a pop fly came flying right next to me. I saw that torpedo coming right for my face, and due to the confinement of being in the vehicle, I had no way to get out of the way. My husband jerked the hatch down to shield my face. The windshield exploded in on me when it hit, but that is most definitely better than the ball to the face. I'm absolutely certain I wouldn't have lived through it, no doubt. A couple months later, my brakes gave out while driving my daughter. We ran a red light in a busy metropolitan area, and somehow, some way, 4 lanes worth of traffic saw what was happening and stopped. I regained control of the car unharmed. The brakes just came back. Another couple months, we rescued a dog from the pound who subsequently viciously attacked my daughter and I in our hallway. It tried to rip my throat out, then turned to charge my daughter. Somehow, I managed to fight the dog off, and I get it out of the house without my daughter or myself being hurt. After that, I woke up one morning, feeling totally normal. Then suddenly I felt really sick. It was that horrible feeling when you know you're going to toss your cookies. I ran to the bathroom, except I didn't get sick. I got down on the floor, thinking it would happen, but then I passed out. I woke up, tried to sit up, couldn't, and passed out again 3 times. I frequently catch glimpses of moving shadows. My dog sometimes lays on me and growls up into the air. Things fall off the walls at night in my daughter's room. Lost things get returned, old trees die in our yard. I frequently wake up with blinding headaches. Not long after the passing out incident, I mentioned the cigarette smell phenomenon on Facebook. A lady messaged me telling me she had grown up with best friends who lived there and the house was a dark history if I wanted to hear it. In the 90s, a man named Norman, a very kind man and a chain smoker, died in my daughter's room of a brain aneurysm. Years later, his wife also died of an overdose on pain pills in the bathroom where I passed out. We later went on to do more digging and met Norman's brother, who said there was also a fire in the house before his family owned it that killed a little boy. The brother said the last family had left because it was too active for them. The daughter of that family saw the shape of a man in her parents' bed, Norman's room, and thought it was her dad napping, but found her dad downstairs watching TV. I do believe there is something bad here that has hurt former occupants, but I also think that those same occupants stick around and look out for us. How many times does a car hit hard enough to bust the siding and studs, but not get the rest of the way through? How often does every single person in a busy intersection manage to drive so defensively that an accident is avoided when brakes fail? What are the statistics on death by baseball, and are near misses even more unusual? And might Norman's wife Janet just have wanted me to know what happened to her? Maybe I felt as she felt, but got to live on. Norman's brother said he loved this house. He lived there happily for decades. He says he was a wonderful person. He showed me pictures, and by golly did he have one of those faces that you can just tell is kind. I already knew by how comforted we feel when we smell his smoke. I'd love to know more about them, and especially the little boy who died. But one thing is for sure. The brother said Norman would love that we take good care of the home, and what a loving family we are. so we won't be going anywhere anytime soon. I'm laying by the wall as I type. Norman's got me.
Imagine my surprise when the local hospice called me and asked if I would be able to do a home cleansing for a patient. As one of the few witchy types living in a very rural Christian town, it wasn't often I was consulted for spiritual assistance. Well, ever, actually. I agreed to meet with the nurse at the hospice and discuss the matter. Now I'm thinking, this is just something the patient wants and they're humouring him. So, further imagine my surprise when I arrived to a meeting with 3 nurses, 2 directors, several other staff members, and the hospice spiritual advisor. These people go on to tell me that this patient and his home are basically under attack by some dark force. Several nurses refuse to even go to his house anymore. They've all seen things yeet across the room and suffered ill physical effects there, such as headaches and respiratory distress. The patient's wife placed open Bibles about the home, only to watch them slam shut and take flight, slamming into the walls. The minister, though not overwhelmingly happy to see me, put his hands up, fully admitted there was a really big problem, and he had no clue what to do about it. So I'm like, okay. Sure, let's see what we've got. When I agreed, a nurse gave me a cross that had been blessed by a priest and told me to keep it. I'm going to speed through the malevolent spirits here because, believe it or not, it's nowhere near the freakiest part of this story. Long story short, all accounts were absolutely accurate. The place was totally screwed up. While moving through the house conducting a home cleansing, it became so hard to breathe that it was hard to even get the words out. In the 11th hour, all people present felt this massive whoosh, and then the patient's wife collapsed. She ended up being just overwhelmed, I think. I stayed for the rest of the afternoon. Eventually, the hospice people even left. Everyone involved felt things were significantly better, especially the patient. So we chatted and visited happily. I don't really like to discuss my views with those who may not share them, but they asked me who I thought had been haunting them. Without going into too much detail, I said I think it was just some sort of dark entity, not anything that ever was a living human. The wife remarked that she always suspected that it was that guy that stabbed him. She went on to spin quite the tale about a man who'd once stabbed her husband in a long ago bar fight. The perpetrator had gone to prison and then later died. At the time, I thought they were way off about that, but didn't discuss it further. But later that evening, I revealed the day's crazy events to my husband and mother-in-law. When I reached the part about the stabbing, she went pale. She asked me the name of the patient and I told her. The person who had stabbed him was my mother-in-law's brother, my husband's uncle. Let me now further mess with your head by totally glossing over the fact, because guess what? That's not the freaky part either. After that day, I paid the patient, Andy, changed to protect identity, numerous visitors, just to check on him. Evaluate the spiritual state of his house. I even did some tarot readings for his family. All remained well for the rest of his life, which was about 6 months. It was a sunny day when Andy's wife called to let me know he'd passed peacefully. I spoke to her quietly, and when I got off the phone, my little girl toddled up to me. She wasn't even 2 and had of course been strictly protected from any kind and all knowledge of the spiritual assistance I'd been providing. She knew nothing of the visits nor the phone call I just received. Heck, she could barely speak complete sentences. Nonetheless, she motioned for me to bend down, and I did. She placed her little hand in my cheek and gave me a beautiful smile. Then she said, "Andy says thank you." So this happened in December or late November 2020. I was a few minutes late for college, and my mum was with me. However, when I arrived, the fire alarm had gone off and everyone from the main building had evacuated. I didn't know if my building had evacuated, so I went across the road to the main entrance to ask a staff member what was going on. He told me it was just the main building and not mine, so I went upstairs and went to my class. Later on, I spoke to my mum, and I can't remember if she messaged me or she told me this when she met after college. But she asked me where I went at the start of the day. I asked what she meant, and she said she saw me walking outside towards another building instead of going to class. She said they had the same bag, clothes, hair, height, literally identical. I told her I went to class, and she didn't believe me at first, but I know I went to class, and eventually she believed me. She probably thinks it was just some strange look-alike, but she doesn't know about doppelgangers and mimics. And after reading some stories on here and other paranormal, I'm sure it was something paranormal my mum saw. To make it scarier, I knew from folklore that seeing a doppelganger of yourself usually meant you were going to die. However, I didn't know what it meant if someone else had seen your doppelganger, so I searched it up, and it means that the person the doppelganger was impersonating is or will become very ill. I've had health issues all my life, but never anything serious like a disease, and didn't have any I knew of at the time. However, just a week ago, I found out I was having gum disease, and it's been causing me to feel nauseous and to have pain in my stomach as well as a sore mouth. I had to go to an emergency appointment with my local dentist. I know that the disease is due to natural causes. However, the fact that my mum seeing the doppelganger meant I was going to be ill is just too much of a coincidence. Due to my OCD, I regularly see hallucinations, and had I have seen it myself, I would think it was a hallucination. However, because my mum saw it, I believe her because she doesn't have a mental illness. She doesn't do drugs and hasn't smoked in over 20 years. She also hasn't drunk and is not the type of person to make something up. This happened around December 2014. My father and I were going on a road trip to see Mount Rushmore. This happened somewhere between leaving Utah and entering Wyoming. We entered the state at night, sometime around 8 or 10 p.m, I can't remember. The first thing that followed us was a red light in the sky. What was odd about it was that from the time we spotted it to the time it went away, it never changed direction, height, intensity, or distance. It was probably about a quarter mile away. Maybe more, maybe less. I couldn't give you an accurate distance. We were at first just curious about it, as there was nothing else around us but darkness and an empty road. We became confused after it never left, even when we sped up, slowed down, and turned the car off, and waited about 15 minutes before going again. It never changed. It stayed with us for about 3 to 4 hours. When it did disappear was when we passed another vehicle. We had been alone the entire drive, no other cars and no towns passed. We were passing a big 18-wheeler. As it passed us, my dad told me he watched it in the rearview mirror, and he saw, as he put it, a big thing just jumped towards us from that truck. At first I didn't believe him, assuming he was trying to scare me. After that, the red light disappeared, and we eventually pulled into our motel for the night. I was the first one out of the car to grab our bags from the trunk. It had been snowing most of the night, and our car had light snow cover on the trunk, not much. What I saw on the trunk was an area that had been stripped of snow recently. I hesitate to say it looked like a handprint, as there were a few strange things about it. First, it was extremely long, going from the edge of the trunk down the license plate, and very thin as bones, for lack of a better comparison. There were 4 fingerprints, but I wouldn't make out a palm or thumb of any kind because it was very messy. As messy as you'd assume it would look if someone tried to jump from one moving vehicle to another. After moving on from that, we went inside and went about our business, getting ready for bed. I was still awake after my dad had fallen asleep. I was on my phone. Maybe an hour after he fell asleep, I started to feel uncomfortable. At first, I didn't know what was happening. It wasn't a feeling of being watched, it felt more like danger. Like I was suddenly getting scared and I couldn't tell why. It wasn't bad at first, just mild fear, like the kind you have while watching a scary movie or something. As I set my phone down, I began to get comfortable. I got extremely uncomfortable, and I remember it felt like a part of the room had gotten darker. My bed was nearest the bathroom, and there was a short wall blocking a view of the door to the bathroom. I remember that it felt like that area was getting darker. I felt extremely uncomfortable. I couldn't turn my back to that part of the room, and I couldn't just lay there, so I covered my head with the blanket. It was a thin blanket, not a big comforter. The second I covered my head, I went from extremely uncomfortable to total fear and panic. That's when I felt truly that it was being watched and not just by one thing. It felt like everything all around me, people or whatever you'd call them, were staring at me. My heart was racing faster than I'd ever felt before. My breathing was so short, I was hyperventilating. I was sweating so much, it was like I had just stepped out of the shower. I started crying as well. I remember the only thing I kept thinking was, do not move. I kept repeating it over and over again. It felt like hours I was sitting there. The feeling stayed the same, but I could almost feel something moving towards me. Not like hearing physical footsteps or anything, but it felt like this was darkness or force or entity, or whatever you want to call it, was getting closer to me, until eventually, it felt like it was face to face with me, only being separated by the blanket. And all at once, the oppressive darkness just stopped. Now, a slow trickle went. I realized at that moment how tense my entire body was, stiff as stone. The only feeling I compare it to was just about a year ago I was attacked by a mountain lion. No injuries, but at that moment when it came after me, I thought I was going to die. Like I truly believed in my heart that I was seconds away from being mauled to death. It was the same feeling when I was under the blankets. I felt like I was seconds from death. I couldn't compare it to anything until then. I only got a few hours of sleep. My dad told me later that day after we'd left the motel that he had a dream about black smoke following him in some building. He's always had vivid dreams, so I'm not sure it's related. After that, there were only a few things that happened. We both felt uncomfortable for a few days after that. We went for a short hike in some national park, near Devil's Tower in Wyoming. We heard a little girl laugh behind us, almost directly behind us, when we were alone. We again heard a little girl laugh when we were out Mount Rushmore. We were taking pictures near this gazebo overlooking the hills. It's somewhere near Mount Rushmore. When we again heard a little girl laugh in the woods, again we were alone. After that, we didn't encounter anything again, nor have we since. I don't know what any of this was, or if it was perhaps just our imagination. Just wanted to talk about it. I was an atheist for most of my early 20s. Like anyone who was forced to go to church as a kid, I quickly left church after I moved out of my parents' home. During my time as an atheist, or agnostic atheist, I didn't really know what to feel about paranormal experiences, or experiences that people have that are simply undefinable. My girlfriend, who I've been with for 3 years now, has always told me about strange experiences she's heard that's happened to her or her family members. These experiences were always related to the paranormal. Being a skeptic, I didn't really know what to make of it. I couldn't agree or disagree to these experiences. My girlfriend always believed in a god or higher power. I was skeptical at best. I remember her always asking me if I was afraid of death. And I said no, because it would simply be just like before I was born. I would be nothing, and that didn't scare me. Now, the event that changed my life happened when I intentionally fell asleep on my couch and was pushed out of my body from my dream. Before that moment, a couple of days before, my girlfriend was telling me about astral projection and told me about the CIA papers about the gateway experience. While I wasn't really sure if this was possible, I was open-minded enough to know that I don't know everything and would give nearly anything a shot. Around 19 or 20, I dropped acid a couple of times and had great experiences with it. So I don't know if this is maybe why I was sort of open-minded to the idea that there is something bigger out there. But as I said, I was a skeptic first. So back to the astral projection. Keep in mind, this happened not too long ago. It was mid-November 2020. My girlfriend was out of town working. I had just come across the CIA papers and the astral projection website. I was very curious and open-minded to the idea that I could leave my body. Hell, I didn't have anything better to do. As I said earlier, I was pushed out of my dream, literally pushed out and astral projected. This is where it got interesting for me. I was 100% conscious while out of my body. I just remember rolling out of my body. Once I did that, it felt like I had very little to no control of my astral body. I was just sort of floating until I told myself to stop so I could be still. I really couldn't see anything. I had no vision, but I somehow knew where I was in relation to my body. I knew I was in my living room and that I wanted to see, but I also felt a strong gravitational pull to my physical body, which is why I think it was difficult to move for me. In my physical body, I had this shirt around my eyes, and for some reason, I thought that the shirt was wrapped around my astral eyes. Once I tried to remove the shirt from my astral eyes, I was back in my body. I've had lucid dreams, and I have dreams almost every night. Astral projection is nothing like dreaming or lucid dreaming. Every time I dream or lucid dream, everything is kind of hazy. There's some detail, but when you wake up, you know it was a form of dream. But this was a completely different experience. I felt myself as I am. I felt that I had a body, but I was as light as air, even though I couldn't see. I didn't get that same sense of haze or fogginess like with a dream. I haven't been able to astral project since then, but from that moment I knew there was more to this life than the materialist outlook. From that moment, I've learned a little more about life, death, and the spirit world. When I was around 8 years old, I went over to my friend's one night for a sleepover. He had two older sisters in their early teens, and they lived with their single mother. She allowed each of her children to have one friend each stay that night, so we had a full house. The night started like any other sleepover, movies, popcorn, etc. He and I were in his living room, playing with action figures, when we heard a loud thud against his bedroom window. It was so loud, his mom came down the hall to investigate. We told her something hit the window and we were pretty scared because it was getting late and it was dark out. His window faced the backyard, which was fenced in with a 6-foot privacy fence. At first, we thought it was his older sisters trying to scare us, but they swore it wasn't them. His mom also said that they were all inside and accounted for. The oldest sister went out to investigate and said there was a handprint on the window. We were freaked out, but we shook it off and went on with the night. That's when things got really creepy. Everyone went to bed for the night. They lived in a 2-story house. His two sisters' rooms were upstairs, along with a bathroom. His and his mom's room were downstairs, along with the kitchen, living room, and an additional bathroom. He and I went to the bed in his room. His two sisters and their friends slept on the floor in the living room with sleeping bags and blankets, so they could fall asleep watching movies. His mom slept on the couch in the living room with the girls. Around 2 a.m., we were all jarred out of our sleep by the sound of his sister's radio playing extremely loudly from her room upstairs. Me and my friend woke up in a panic and ran down the hall to the living room. That's when we saw her light was also on and bleeding down the stairs. His two sisters, their friends, and his mom were all there and accounted for. All of us, including his mom, were very scared. Mind you, this was almost 20 years ago. There were no Alexas or Google devices. His sister's radio wasn't an alarm clock. It was one of those old school stereos with the equalizer and tape deck and all separate. There's no way the stereo or the lights could have been set to turn on. And when I say it was loud at max volume. It was also playing a station she didn't listen to. What was so scary is how visibly scared his mom was. She didn't even want to go upstairs to investigate. It couldn't have been one of his sisters because we would have heard them running down the stairs, and they couldn't have made it back to the living room fast enough. They were also as scared as us. We all tried to go back to sleep, but I didn't sleep well that night. Fast forward to a few years later. My friend and his family moved out. A man was living there that had a daughter, maybe 5 years old. He was going through a divorce and custody battle, so we didn't see him much as he was pretty depressed. But when he had his daughter, we would sometimes see him outside with her, absolutely elated. He loved her to death. I remember hearing my dad tell my mom one day that the court decided in favour of the mother and he lost custody. He wasn't even granted visitation. After that, I never saw the man again. One day, I got home from school and my dad was visibly shaken. I asked him what was wrong and he said that he was outside doing yard work after the bus picked us up for school. He said he then heard a loud pop echo through the neighbourhood, sounding like a gunshot. He was sure it came from the man's house, so he went over and knocked, but no one answered. My dad called the police, who found the man laying in his backyard, dead, with a rifle in his hand. I guess the depression from losing his little girl was too much for him. All I could think at the time was how sad I was, but grateful he waited until the bus came back to pick us up. Our bus stop was 4 houses down from his house. I was just starting middle school when this happened, and I remembered the night I had a sleepover and the weird events. To this day, my dad still lives on that road. I'm 32 now, and every time I see that house, it still creeps me out. So when I was around 6 to 8 years old, I would come down into my basement to play games with my younger brother all the time. He was around 5 to 7 at the time. We were playing Minecraft Xbox 360 edition, and were messing around in creative mode, when the world generation started to bug out. Half-iron doors generating in mountainsides, and corrupt villagers were loading in. My brother thought it all looked a little weird, and he left to use the restroom. While he was in there, the TV started to show static and it began to make an alien roaring sound. The lights in my basement flickered and the Xbox shut off on its own. It actually never worked again after this. It really freaked me out. I got this horrifying sense that something evil was coming. I looked over towards the wall and saw this black shadowy figure clawing out of the wall. It had these piercing, almost glowing eyes, and when it saw me, it ran straight through a wall and I could see it standing in the darkness through an open door. I ran up to my parents crying, and don't kill me for this, I was little and didn't know better. And I told them that it was a black guy that came through the basement wall. They really didn't know how to react to this, so they went downstairs with me and showed me that there was nothing there. I was too afraid to go downstairs alone for the next couple of months. A couple of years later, my parents had their friends over and they brought their kids. We all went downstairs and I told them what I told you above. We decided it would be cool to have a ghost hunt. We set a ghost trap by coating the floor with marbles and put a Lincoln log house in the middle of the room. I thought it was mean, so it would want to break my house, and when it did, it would trip and fall and we would hear it. We went upstairs for some drinks, and when we went back downstairs, there was a clear path through the marbles going to the now completely demolished Lincoln house. The pieces were blasted across the room. and back into the room I saw it run into the first time. My friends were now convinced of its existence as well. A few days ago, this is what made me remember all of this because it was a while ago, I had this creepy nightmare where there were tons of shadow people standing around my bed, and when I could close my eyes, I could see right through them and I couldn't look away. They weren't hurting me, just really creeping me out. Oh, and in case this means anything, I sleep in my basement now, right next to the room where I saw it run into. Occasionally, I can hear knocking on the wall where I first saw it, and other sounds coming from that room. And yes, still to this day, I can see it just out of the corner of my eye, darting around in that room, and when the lights are off, all around my basement. Ever since I was a little boy, I've always had this feeling of being watched in the dark. I didn't begin to have this fear though until one night I remember seeing a shadow on the wall and was unable to distinguish the shape. That is when my fear started. Growing up Catholic, I just thought it was a demon or a ghost and my house was haunted. But things began getting worse as I began feeling paranoid in any dark place, or sprinting down a dark road or hallway. I thought I was being silly, but then I started having dreams. The dreams were terrifying but short-lived. They first began when I slept in our first steady home. I'd just wake up halfway, unable to move and feel this crushing pressure on my chest. I couldn't explain it, but it was there. Talking to my mom, she told me it was simply sleep paralysis. Being 9 or 10 at the time, I just accepted it. I didn't start to become scared until I was a freshman in high school and we moved again. Things got worse. The dreams started getting worse and I started seeing things moving around, to the point I couldn't sleep without a light, or would stare straight up at my ceiling to avoid the dark corners. I began losing sleep constantly because every time I shut my eyes, I would feel that pressure on my chest worse than before. I brought this up to my grandmother. She grew up on Guam, we are Chamorro, and she explained to me how on the islands her family had a name for those creatures and called them Mr. Moon because of the way they cast shadows. She told me that Mr. Moon had followed her since she was a little girl and explained how she would feel chills any time before she encountered him. Well, not long after confiding in her the dreams, I saw the figure. It had these long, scrawny fingers and horns like that of a ram and glowing yellow eyes, and would perch at the end of my bed and watch me. Me being deeply Catholic, would start praying to St. Michael the Archangel immediately, and every time I woke up, this brought me some relief for a while. Every time I experienced it, I'd pray and I would wake up. The dreams happened less and less often. Well, one morning I woke up my brother, only 18 months younger than me, screaming. We shared a wall, so I heard him. I go running over to see what was wrong, and he describes to me my exact dream I had been having. We later had a priest come bless our house, but all these years later, I find myself down this rabbit hole, wondering if any of you know what this is or who, because I've been terrified for most of my life, waiting for it to come back. My grandmother is a famous musician. She resides in a century-old mansion in LA, where I visit her a few times a year. I'm unfamiliar with the history of this house, but I do know her pool was the first to ever be installed in LA. Anyways, 15 years ago, I was sitting at the dinner table with my mom, brother, and grandmother eating dinner. The dinner table faced a glass-tiled window, where you could see to the outside garden. I remember hearing the palm trees outside swaying erratically, despite it not being windy. Suddenly, a dark figure passed by the window. I guess that's when we decided to investigate. We went outside to the terrace garden, walking in the direction of where the shadow went. To our surprise, my Barbie doll It was the Swan Lake Barbie, so it was limited edition, was sat upright on the bench. Not only did I not remember putting the doll there, but it was quite dirty and her hair was matted. That was kind of weird, but we chalked it up to me being a forgetful, messy child. Later that night, I went back to my room to put my Barbie back in my luggage bag, the usual place where I kept them. To my surprise, my Swan Lake Barbie doll was still in my luggage. And now I had two. It was as if the Barbie was duplicated. I ended up taking it home, but forever got weird vibes from it. Please note that this house is notoriously known for poltergeist activity. Maybe if this event occurred somewhere else, I'd be able to offer a logical explanation. But things like this are not uncommon at her property. She's quite a lonely woman, so she definitely wasn't having any other kids over. She lives in a gated community where houses are separated by acres. There was no possibility someone had left it there. And it was the exact same Barbie. Limited edition. This happened to me several days ago, and I'm still unsure what to think about it. I was at Whole Foods to pick up an Amazon package because they have the pickup lockers right outside the entrance in the garage. I walk up to the lockers and there's this guy standing right in front of the lockers, just staring straight ahead. He doesn't acknowledge me, so I ask him if he needs help. Nothing. Doesn't even seem like he heard me. Just keeps staring ahead, not blinking or moving. So I go inside the store to get an employee so they can maybe call for medical or police help, and also so I can safely get my package. While talking with the employee, another shopper overheard me and said, "I'm glad you said something, because I saw him when I came in and thought it was creepy, and that was about 20 minutes ago." The employee comes out with me and asks the man to leave, but he just keeps staring. I get my package and get in my car, which is parked right in front, so I can still see him. I see the employee go back inside, probably to call the police. I look down for maybe 5 seconds to start my car, look back up, and he's gone. I see the employee come back out looking confused. He starts walking around the parking garage to see where the guy went. Can't find him. There's nowhere he could have gone in the few seconds I was looking away. There was only a few other cars in the garage, none of which were occupied. I don't know what to make of it. My friend suggested he was on drugs, but he didn't seem like it. Clean clothes, fit and healthy looking, no cracked out eyes or anything. Wondering if anyone has experienced something similar. I had tried doing DMT before this point and had some weird, difficult to remember or describe experiences. But this was an unexpected trip that occurred without smoking anything beforehand, just meditation and focus. I found myself in a sort of plaza, surrounded by seemingly demonic beings. Tansy growled, snarled, and made other terrifying noises beyond my comprehension. Then, quite suddenly, the words made sense. I stopped trying to hide and looked around. The people around me were not wholly evil nor good. They were people, but far from anything resembling human. Not as important, though. I realized the being talking to me sounded like Lisa Kudrow. Apparently that was my brain filtering the information. She reassured me that no one was being mean. It's scary, and tried to be comforting. And that we started talking. Instead of seeking answers about the meaning or life or anything like that, I asked about her world. She showed me her job and I freaked out. She was blasting away galaxies. She told me to calm down. It was nothing worse than mowing the lawn. Really. I asked where we were, and she told me it was kind of 7th dimension, 3 layers past time and space. I asked if there was much more dimensions beyond this, and she gave a shrug. Apparently, the 9th dimension was completely occupied by an incredibly self-absorbed mist that we're pretty sure we have contained now. It used to bother your world, but we try to keep it occupied. That was all she would say. Finally, she took me to the human corals. This is where most of us end up when we travel there, though not everyone on every trip. And there were these screens, through which one could view the experiences of people. It was through these screens that I saw my two co-workers visit the realm. This is my story. My thoughts are these. This place is the holographic projection of life from Earth. It seemed to be made of solid compressed light that was captured over eons. The city itself was built from light and could easily have been described as made of precious gems or crystals. I think, cannot yet prove, that this is a nexus point for the energy that comes from the planet, a place we all come from and eventually return to. I think that the knowledge of it has been lost, and there are pieces scattered throughout history and in various religions. All of this being said, there's still a chance that this all could be nothing more than my overreactive brain and imagination at work, though I feel there is too much coincidence at play for this. This happened about 5 years ago. I was living in a different city while going to university. This was in Sweden, so I'm sorry for any errors in this text. Firstly, I'm prone to lucid dreaming, and therefore just convinced myself that this was a dream, even though it didn't feel like it. I lived in a small apartment on the 5th floor with a pretty big balcony with glass windows that you could slide open all around. I'm very sensitive to light when I sleep, so I usually had the blinds shut, both out on the balcony and on the windows that were on the wall between my bedroom and the balcony. One night, I woke up because of a bluish light shining in through the blinds. At first, I thought it was the moon, but it felt too bright. I looked towards the balcony to see if I missed closing the blinds out there, which I admittedly had. But I realized it wasn't the moonlight I saw out there. It was much smaller and much closer. It hovered over another apartment complex a couple 100 meters away. I instantly felt a primal fear I have never felt before. My heart just dropped in my chest and I had trouble breathing. I couldn't look away and I couldn't move. Some rational part of me had a quick thought of, is this sleep paralysis? But then I felt eyes on me, many eyes, and I just knew I had to hide. I hid under my blanket and closed my eyes hard. I kept thinking, I didn't see anything. I promise, I didn't see anything. Over and over again. I had such an adrenaline rush that I was shaking. The next thing I know, it was morning again and my body was aching. I was in pain, but it felt like the pain came from the inside, like when you get lightly shocked from an electrical fence. It hurts really bad for a second, and it's just an overall feeling of ache and tingling. I could still remember everything up until I closed my eyes and hid under the blankets. The ache and tingles disappeared after a couple of hours. It was early November 2010, and we've just finished celebrating All Souls Day, or Day of the Dead, here in the Philippines. We lived in a small subdivision surrounded by kind neighbours, so we didn't really expect things to turn south that fast. It's just me, my brother, my mom and dad, grandfather and cousin who've been living in the house for about 6 months, and so far, so good. My mom's store's doing great. First time being able to watch Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon, and I've just started my Pokemon Fire Red playthrough when it happened. My cousin told us about the voices she heard at night, and the constant banging she feels underneath her bed. We shrugged it off as some nightmares, and days passed until she brought it up again, but this time, she woke up nearby the stairs at 3 a.m, and that actually made my parents a little worried. I was a kid, so I wasn't actually scared. To be honest, I'm actually pretty pumped to experience my first paranormal activity. My brother, on the other hand, was quiet for some reason. What my cousin told us the next day actually sent shivers down my spine. She was taking a bath, and when she poured water on her back, It parted ways like someone or something was on her back. Initially, it wasn't that scary, but I was reminded of Shutter and boy, that scared me to death when we watched it. The scene on the ladder. It was then that my brother admitted that he can see spirits, actually, shadow and light figures. And my dad actually experienced participating in an exorcism when he was still young. The events that proceeded to unfold are just horrifying thinking about it now that I'm older. We had our first exorcism, and it wasn't what I expected it to be. She was just lying on the bed and saying weird stuff. I actually hoped that she'd levitate or rotate her hands, not gonna lie. She was able to rip a page from the Bible before becoming stable. My brother heard voices of different genders and age. What's worse is that she had to sleep in our room since hers is cursed or something. She slept below the side where I usually sleep, and in that moment, I've never wanted to sleep as fast in my entire life. The thought of opening your eyes and she's floating above you or staring at you directly in your face, ugh. The next day was kind of tame. My cousin was doing fine, and my grandpa just happened to see a lady in a black veil coming down from the stairs into the kitchen, which was just an extension of the house. I was outside that time as well as my parents and brother, so not the type of news we'd want to hear. The next day was the grand finale, good versus evil, as I watch everything unfold while eating a bowl of pancit canton noodles. It was the worst she's ever been physically, and it looked terrifying. She started doing incantations, to which my dumb 10-year-old brain responded with more made-up incantations. I didn't take it seriously at all. They decided to cleanse her room, which was even harder to do because of her brother participating in the cleanse, and eventually getting possessed too. He looked at one of the images of my grandmother, to which he described the eyes turning black, and that's when he lost control. He was freaking strong, being able to take on my dad and priest's assistant. Eventually, she threw up a black necklace and decided to do a kill it's on the dance floor, as witnessed by my kid brain. She looked into a mirror, and just like that, it was over. They took care of the mirror and she was brought into church rehab. We didn't realize how many spectators we had outside of our house. We discovered that the owner of the house performed a ritual after the extension, so yeah, we had to move out. I'm glad it's just the house that's haunted. She's doing fine now, and so are we. According to some of our ex-neighbours, they'll still see figures inside her room when they walk past it. I'm from just outside the Wilmington, North Carolina area, where there was a lot of Civil War activity and rice plantations and cotton fields. Anyways, this all takes place in my old home, and it began with hearing pans in our kitchen moving around at night. Like any young kid at the time, this really scared me, and I'd always duck under the covers and hide. We lived in a small town home, and one night, I decided to build up the courage and go and check out all the commotion. And I'm not kidding, this was every night. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear the pans and pots still rustling around like someone was cooking something. Maybe it was my dad or mom, I thought, but as I turned the corner to the kitchen, my mind and everything I knew or had known about the paranormal took an amazing turn as I sat there in awe. A lady, obviously a slave-looking woman, from the mid-1800s I'd say, was walking around literally cooking or attempting to cook in our kitchen. Now I know ghosts usually don't stick around long after you see them, but this one was different. She was friendly, had a nice smile, looked about mid-20s or early 30s, and had a white gown and a black apron. Somehow, I hadn't realized she didn't notice me, so I decided to try communicating, and I said, "Hello, who are you?" "Martha," she replied. "Don't be scared." I was shocked I was able to communicate with her. I was able to have full-on conversations with this woman. She told me about how she tried to escape the plantation, what life was like, and how she feels like being a ghost. Now I know most of you won't believe me, but I swear to you, all I know what I saw, I know the interactions I had. Sometimes she would make food and leave it out, or sometimes I would wake up to her petting my head, running her ghostly human feeling hands through my hair. She was the nicest, most interesting being I've ever had an interaction with, and eventually every now and then, 3 or 4 times a week, I would see her or be able to interact with her. And then suddenly, just as fast as she had come, she vanished. These interactions and events all happened within a 3 year period, and as silly as it sounds, I kind of miss her and wish I could see her again. I've always been the type to dismiss the inexplainable. Never really believed in ghost stories or anything like it. My mom, however, is a different story. For context, she grew up in a small town in an Eastern European country where people in general are fascinated by the weird and the unknown. As a young girl, my mom would always tell these kind of stories. How some of the women in our family were very skilled in all sorts of witchcraft. How she seen and heard things that she could never get an explanation of. I would always enjoy listening to her stories, but as the person I am, I'd never fully believe it. Stories where she would hear 5 to 6 year old me moaning at night, only to find that my hair had mysteriously been half braided the next morning. How my infant baby brother, who at that point would hardly even move, once rolled out of bed and hit the floor when she left him alone for a couple of minutes in the parents' bedroom. There are so many of these stories. Needless to say, I don't know if I'm going crazy or imagining things, but I've had some experiences of my own. I don't live in the town where my mother grew up, but throughout my childhood, we had a tradition of spending most of our summer vacation at my grandma's, who was still living in that town until she passed a few years ago. My grandpa died before I was even born, so grandma was living on her own in a 2 story house. My parents would often leave us kids alone with grandma in the big house. The town itself was generally very safe at that time, a sort of everyone knows everyone town. My grandma often had the front door open all day, which may sound very weird, but that was very common, especially among the elderly there. Well, this house is where I had both my encounters, which I cannot explain to this day. I must have been around 14 when the first thing happened. I was home alone with my 7-year-old younger brother and grandma. Grandma had a habit of falling asleep in her chair, but my brother and I were both there in the living room when we saw the top of her head pass by the window into our yard. I rushed outside and so did my brother. Needless to say, there was nothing there. No one. Not only that, the window was so high up that it would be impossible to see anyone walk by it. My father tested it out, about 1.9 meters tall, and indeed we didn't see anything. I remember it so vividly. My first thought fell on my deceased grandfather. The second time was a couple of years later in the very same room with the very same people. Only this time, I saw someone enter the house and head up the stairs to the first floor. I didn't see much, just a silhouette. I didn't hear anything either. Naturally, my brother and I searched all the rooms upstairs, every closet, under every bed, every possible hiding spot, but nothing and no one was found. To this day, I still wonder what that was. I haven't visited the town or house since my grandmother passed, and honestly, I have no intentions of going there again.